Good afternoon, everyone. The Sacramento City Council will please come to order. Would the clerk please call the roll to establish a quorum?
Mayor Pro Tem Ashby.
Here.
Councilmember Warren. I do not see Councilmember Warren online. Vice Mayor Harris.
Present.
Councilmember Hanson.
Here.
Councilmember Chenier.
Here.
Councilmember Guerra.
Here.
Councilmember Jennings.
Present.
Councilmember Carr.
Here.
And Mayor Steinberg.
I am here. Thank you. If we could all begin the meeting by rising, I would ask, let's ask Councilmember Hanson today to please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Thank you, Mayor. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Very good. Good afternoon to everybody. We begin with a special presentation. I'll turn it over to Mayor Pro Tem Ashby for a presentation regarding collaboration on the medical and scientific side between Sacramento and Cuba.
I think this is Councilmember Warren's item. I do not have a lot of information other than that Councilmember Warren really wanted to bring this item forward and has done a lot over the last several years in partnership with Cuba. He's done several visits there and taking folks with him and worked on building some medical facilities out there that he personally has helped finance to serve the folks in Cuba, and has created a terrific relationship for the city of Sacramento and the people of Cuba that he has worked with, Mayor.
Very good. Yes, I know that Councilman Warren, I know Bill Camp and others have been involved for a long time in opening doors and creating relationships and friendships, and it's very much appreciated. Sacramento is a big part of the larger world. So
yes, he's done a wonderful job of creating a bridge there, and I am happy to be a part of recognizing and acknowledging them today.
very good. Then it shall be so recognized. And if there's an appropriate resolution, we'll make sure that we get it to the right people. So thank you for standing in on that one. Let us now move to the consent calendar. Are there items from the consent calendar that members would like to take off or to discuss? I know I have one that I just want to mention, but I'll wait for other members.
I have a question on item 16.
Go ahead, Jay.
Thank you, Mayor.
Council members.
This is for either the city manager or Mr. Jasso. This is part of the youth mental health program. It's a $500,000 CARES Act fund. I'm just trying to ascertain I'm assuming this is going into the city program, but I wanted to make sure of that. It doesn't really say. I know there's a couple of different things going on this, so I don't know if there's anyone who can answer that question.
Michael Jass, I believe Department Director Ulrich is on the call, unless Jody, can you?
I think this would be either Lindy or Mario Lara.
Yeah, number 16 is not
Sorry, my mistake.
Convention and Cultural Services.
This is the one where I think it's either going to be Mario or Chris. They both have worked on this together here.
Oh, is this the city program? This is not what we're doing, pro youth and families? Okay, that was my question. So that's fine. And then the other question / direction I have is, when will we see kind of a final accounting on all the CARES money? I know that within this item and other items, there's the listing, but I'm assuming some of the items within that listing have changed over time. So when do we get a good accounting of this? Is that coming soon, Mr. City Manager?
So we do have a quarterly update. I don't know the timing of that. Lainey, are you on the call? Can you provide that update? I don't know what the timing is for the next update to the council. You're on mute. You're muted, Lainey.
We had a September, our next update for the feds is not until the close of the project. So we'll probably know early December, mid-December, where the dust settled and our contractors' ability to utilize the funds through December 30, notwithstanding any changes the federal government might make to extend that could happen between now and then. That is the easy change for them to make. And so it's going to be kind of day by day in December. So I don't know that we'll have anything for you with dust settled until January.
So I know, Mr. City Manager, we've delegated authority to you, which I think is the right thing to do. We don't want to leave any of these funds on the table, but I think an update, even with what we have or what we know in early December, would be helpful if we need to figure out how to spend additional dollars or get them out the door. I guess my request would be that we would come back December 8th with, even as a receive and file item, just with what we know.
Up to that date. Sure.
Yeah.
We can do that.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Happy to move consent.
It's moved
By the
in.
way. Second.
Moved and seconded. The only item that I want to just flag quickly in light of what we are going to be considering in a few minutes, which is namely the cannabis audit, is item 2, which again may be appropriate, but it does call for an extension of the moratorium on ownership transfer for dispensaries, as I just read it, for a year. Again, that may be appropriate, but should that trail the discussion of the audit, since it's relevant to the recommendations and the direction that the council might or might give on the subject? I'd like to just hear from Lainey, Ms. Milstein on that question in terms of your recommendation, whether or not we should hear that after the audit.
I think that it is appropriate to consider it on consent, even outside of the audit recommendations, because we as staff believe that we would like the time and like to have the opportunity to bring any recommendations back to council while we're maintaining a status quo. But it is certainly up to the council to determine if they'd like to hear it afterwards.
Okay, Councilman Chenier has led on these issues. You take your lead on this. Do you want to pass this now, or do you want to hear it after the audit?
I think it's fine to hear it now. I do think, and I plan to speak on this when we hit the audit as well, we have a lot of decisions to make about policy. This has been basically one-offs as we've gone forward with it. Fundamentally, do we want to treat this industry different than we treat all other industries in the city? I don't have a problem doing a moratorium up to a year, but I would like to talk about a time frame for this to come back so we can make decisions. I think the council has to adopt a policy on this, and I would look forward to that discussion sooner rather than later. But moving forward on this, I think is fine.
Okay, that's fine then. I will not seek an amendment to the motion on the consent calendar then. We do have one caller on consent, so let's hear from the caller from the public.
Thank you. May I have a caller, please? Welcome to the meeting. You have 2 minutes to address the council.
Yes, I'd like to thank the mayor and the city council for allowing me to speak. One of the concerns I have as a resident is that you're not coming to the public before you do motions and seconds. The request to have the consent calendar individually addressed is something that I would like to have done. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your comments. We have no more callers.
Okay, let us call the roll then on the consent calendar, please.
Mayor Pro Tem Ashby?
Yes.
Councilmember Warren is absent. Vice Mayor Harris?
Aye.
Councilmember Hanson?
Aye.
Councilmember Chenier?
Aye.
Councilmember Guerra?
Aye.
Councilmember Jennings?
Aye.
Councilmember Carr?
Aye.
And Mayor Steinberg.
Aye. The consent calendar passes. Let's move now to item 18. Mr. Lemos?
Good afternoon, Mayor Steinberg and members of the City Council. I am Peter Lemos, Code and Housing Enforcement Chief for your Community Development Department. The items before you today are the Neighborhood Code Compliance and Housing and Dangerous Buildings case fees and penalties for special assessments and/or personal obligations. I would like to present items 18 and 19 concurrently. Housing and Dangerous Buildings case fees. Staff report lists an amended total of 143 properties with a total of $170,477.27 of unpaid fees scheduled for liens against the properties. 5 properties listed in Exhibit A of the staff report have set up a payment plan and/or been paid in full and are identified as items 24, 123 and 24, 156, 158 through 160, 197, and 198. Item 19, the Community Development Department Administrative Penalties and/or Neighborhood Code Compliance Case Fee Staff Report listed an amended total of 236 properties with a sum of $722,952.10 of unpaid fees and personal special and or special assessment or personal obligations against the property. 16 of these properties listed in Exhibit A of the staff report have been removed from the report and are identified as line numbers 32, 62, 75 and 76, 100, 240, 244, 311, 318, 365, 368 through 372, 406, 410, 421 through 423, and 438. Staff recommends that the City Council adopt the 2 resolutions separately, as amended, to allow the city to collect the unpaid fees by placing special assessment levies and/or personal obligations against the properties. And that concludes my presentation.
Okay, so these items, that's 18, 19, are being taken together here. We do have some callers, public testimony. Let's hear from the public. How many callers do we have, Madam Clerk?
I believe we have 2 callers.
Okay, let's hear from the public.
Thank you. May I have my first caller, please? Nope, it appears the callers have hung up. So we have no more callers.
Okay, then let's take a motion and a second on both items separately, I assume, correct?
Mayor, on number 18, I move to open and close the public hearing and move the item.
Okay.
Second.
And is there a second? Vice Mayor moved it. Who seconded it?
Larry Carr.
Larry Carr, thank you. Okay, let's call the roll then on that item.
Mayor Pro Tem Ashby,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Harris.
Aye.
Councilmember
Alan
Hanson.
Warren's here as well.
Thank you. Councilmember Warren,
Yes.
Councilmember Hanson,
Aye.
Councilmember Hanson,
Aye.
Councilmember Chenier,
Aye.
Councilmember Guerra,
Aye.
Councilmember Jennings,
Aye.
Councilmember Carr,
Yes.
and Mayor Steinberg.
Aye. All right, motion and a second on 19 was repeat Vice Mayor Harris, seconded by Councilmember Carr, if that's okay. Let's call without objection, let's call the roll.
Mayor, can I interrupt for a moment? This is Sandra Talbot with the City Attorney's Office.
Of course.
I see Councilmember Warren has just arrived. I believe he has a conflict on item 19. I'm not certain if it was resolved
Oh, thank you.
by the removal of certain items. So I'd leave it up to Councilmember Warren if he is permitted to vote on this item.
I will recuse myself, Assistant City Attorney.
Thank you.
Okay, so Councilmember Warner is recusing himself on item 19. Thank you. Let's call the roll then on item 19.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Harris, would you please open and close the public hearing?
He did. I stated that. I repeated it for him. Councilmember Carr seconded. In other words.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Ashby
Yes.
and Councilmember Warren is recusing. Vice Mayor Harris,
Aye.
Councilmember Hanson,
Aye.
Councilmember Chenier,
Aye.
Councilmember Guerra,
Aye.
Councilmember Jennings,
Yes.
Councilmember Carr,
Aye.
and Mayor Steinberg.
Aye. Okay, that passes 8-0 with Councilmember Warren recusing. Let's now move to the heart of the agenda, I think this afternoon, with the audit of the cannabis storefront dispensary permitting process. This is an action item to receive the report, and it requires a 2/3 vote because it's going straight to the city council instead of the budget and audit committee.
That is correct. Can everybody hear me okay?
Welcome. Yes.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor and members of the City Council. Jorge Ceguera, your City Auditor. With me today are members of the team that performed the audit, including Lynn Bashaw, Kevin Christensen, and Nathan Lugo. The recommendation that is before you is that you pass a motion by a 2/3 vote to temporarily suspend the council rules and procedures to bypass the Budget and Audit Committee. And once we do that, the second recommendation is that we approve the city auditor's audit of cannabis storefront dispensary permitting process. I don't know if we need to do the 2/3 first or if that can just be done at the end.
I'm not sure. What's
I'll go ahead and move the item, or not the item. I'll move the process.
okay? Let's make it a legitimate presentation here, okay?
I will second.
Okay, call the roll, please.
Mayor Pro Tem Ashby,
Yes.
Councilmember Warren,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Harris,
Aye.
Councilmember Hanson,
Aye.
Councilmember Chenier,
Aye.
Councilmember Guerra,
Aye.
Councilmember Jennings,
Aye.
Councilmember Carr,
Yes.
and Mayor Steinberg.
Aye. Okay, this matter is now properly before the city council. Mr. Segretti, please proceed with the substance.
Thank you very much. The Office of the City Auditor provides the city with objective, independent, and reliable information regarding the city's ability to meet its goals and establish an adequate system of internal controls. In accordance with the mayor and council's request, the objective of this audit was to determine whether the city dispensary permitting process complied with cannabis regulations and whether regulations should be updated. We also reviewed proposed legislative changes related to increasing the number of cannabis dispensary permits. We reviewed policies and regulatory structures for other cities regulating cannabis dispensaries, as well as government agencies regulating controlled industries such as gambling. As a quick refresher, this map shows the location of 29 permitted dispensaries in the city, grouped by council district. The number of permitted dispensaries per council district is listed on the left. We list 30 dispensaries, but only mapped 29 as number 7, Canacare, currently does not have a storefront dispensary. When California voters approved Proposition 215 in 1996, which allowed the distribution and consumption of cannabis for medical purposes, cannabis was still and is still considered a type 1 narcotic and considered illegal by the federal government. Regulation of medical cannabis in California was in a state of flux through the 2000s, in part due to the uncertainty of potential enforcement of federal law, which listed cannabis as an illegal substance. In an effort to provide some legal protection for distributors and users of medical cannabis, the California Attorney General in 2008 issued a set of guidelines for municipalities and cannabis businesses to follow. One key element of the regulations was the medical cannabis businesses must organize and operate as collectives or cooperatives. These corporate structures are different from for-profit or general stock businesses. For-profit businesses exist to generate profit for its owners. In contrast, cooperatives and collectives are designed to benefit all of its members. This is a critical distinction. In fact, as we discuss in finding 1, this requirement would complicate the city's ability to prohibit and manage ownership transfers, management control changes, and the transfer of permits. Between 2009 and 2010, the city established a process for permitting medical marijuana dispensaries, which consisted of three main parts: registration, phase 1, and phase 2. Per the original legislation, the permitting process from the applicant's registered owners to the issuance of the permit was slated to take about 1.5 years. The permitting process ended up taking several years to complete due to some uncertainty in federal enforcement of marijuana laws. The first permit was issued in December of 2014. The 30th permit was issued in May of 2015, more than 4 years after the initial registration. The first finding in this report focuses on dispensary ownership transfers, the continuity concept, the consolidation of several dispensaries by a small group of individuals, and how evaluating others could help the city better control transfers and strengthen internal controls. City officials early on acknowledged that the city's registration restrictions and regulations prohibiting transfers did not align with the state and city guidelines requiring medical cannabis dispensaries to operate as cooperatives or collectives. For example, state rules governing cooperatives and collectives envisioned that managers, officials, and directors may change over time. However, city code did not provide a mechanism for this type of management movement. In addition, city code did not provide a detailed definition of transfer, ownership, management control, or person in the context of cannabis regulations. As a result, according to city management, the city code had to be interpreted to allow the kinds of management changes permitted by California law governing cooperatives and collectives. In response to this perceived conflict, city management, in consultation with the city attorney's office, adopted an informal concept called continuity in an attempt to bring city's new regulations in closer alignment with state laws. It should be noted that although city code included language prohibiting relocation of permit transfers, the prohibition on ownership and permit transfers was not in effect until a permit was issued. The city issued storefront dispensary permits, as I mentioned before, between December 2014 and May of 2015. As a result, prior to the issuance of the permit, the city likely approved some of the types of ownership and management control changes that would likely have been prohibited had a permit been issued. In 2016, city staff requested a change to the city code regarding the prohibition on relocations and permit transfers, stating, current city code does not allow management members to change. This is not practical for ongoing operations, and city code should reflect this. It is not practical to require a dispensary to keep its officers and management static. The city should not allow the entity to change in its entirety. However, employees, managers, and officers will need to change on occasion, and city code should reflect this reality. As noted on this slide, the updated language focused more on the permit rather than the dispensary and limits what can be done with the permit. Since the updated code focused on the permit, a permit holder could now add individuals to the company and more easily effectuate an ownership transfer by, for example, later removing themselves from the company. A practice like this, coupled with the continuity concept, created a path for dispensary owners and permits to change hands between interested parties. Based on our review of records, we found that at least 18 of the 30 dispensaries changed owners over time. These changes in ownership allowed for a small group of individuals to obtain ownership of numerous dispensary permits. As shown on this slide, one group of 5 owners have, in some cases individually and in other cases collectively, gained ownership control over 9 of the 30 dispensary permits. To assess how others approach similar issues, we surveyed other cities governing cannabis operations and regulatory agencies overseeing controlled activities such as card rooms and gambling to evaluate their practices. Based on our research, municipalities and agencies regulating cannabis and other controlled activities implemented different schemes based on whether transfers are permitted or prohibited. We believe that depending on how the city council wants to proceed in terms of regulating transfers, the city can pull from these benchmarked entities to assist in designing regulatory frameworks and internal controls that adequately reflect the City Council's policy to ensure transparency and safety while allowing the retail cannabis dispensary business environment the kind of flexibility needed to function effectively. We have one recommendation in the first finding, and that is that we seek direction from the City Council to determine whether dispensary transfers should be allowed. The Office of Cannabis Management, in conjunction with the City Attorney's Office, should then propose a City Code update that clearly articulates the policy and legal goals of the City Council that are in conformance with state law. Our second finding focuses more closely on ownership and the need to better define exactly what constitutes ownership. We believe that opportunities exist for the city to design and implement a more comprehensive definition of ownership that specifically establishes the shares of control of a dispensary that qualify as ownership. Based on our research, it appears many of the agencies equate ownership with owning more than 50% of the entity. In addition, some financial record disclosure requirements are far more stringent than the city's current disclosure requirements to ensure the applicants and permitted operators provide requisite information to the municipality, such as requiring disclosure for ownership changes of 10% or more. In our opinion, the city should utilize the experiences of municipalities and agencies regulating cannabis and other controlled activities to propose new definitions of ownership and ownership changes in conjunction with discussions of transfer regulations discussed in finding 1. We have 3 recommendations in finding 2, and that is to seek direction from City Council to determine whether both existing and new cannabis storefront dispensary owners must comply with City Code provision 5.150 and clarify the city's expectation on how the code provision will be enforced. Seek direction from City Council to determine standards and definitions of ownership of cannabis dispensaries in the city and propose a City Code update, and design and implement an internal control framework over the cannabis permit application and renewal process based on best practices. This should include establishing an organizational structure, segregate duties, and assign responsibilities. Our third finding emphasizes the importance of being able to determine who the beneficial owners are of storefront dispensaries. As the cannabis industry grows and becomes more lucrative, as more investors seek entry, and as owners seek higher levels of corporate liability protection, the city will likely receive cannabis dispensary renewal packages and changes of ownership requests from for-profit dispensaries with more sophisticated and complicated ownership structures. In order for the city to determine the true ownership of these companies, to adequately assure that ownership rules are followed, it is imperative to determine the identity of beneficial owners as part of the permit application and renewal process. This is just a quick example of how a ownership structure can complicate determining who the true beneficial owner is. As shown in this example, there is a dispensary that is owned by Company A, Jane, and Company B. Jane owns 35% directly of the dispensary. However, when you peel back some of the ownership information related to this simple example, you can see that Jane also has ownership interests in Company A and Company B. As a result, her combined interest in the dispensary is actually 60% versus the initial 35% that we describe in this slide. We have one recommendation in this finding, and that is that we incorporate researching beneficial ownership into existing operations and provide training to staff on how to conduct this research or hire an outside consultant to conduct this work on the city's behalf. The fourth and last finding in this report focuses on the expansion of the number of storefront dispensary permits. In previously holding the number of dispensary permits at 30, the city has taken a cautious approach consistent with best practices issued by public policy specialists. Increasing the permitted dispensary cap from 30 to 40 would result in a dispensary to resident ratio that would be commensurate with cannabis industry advocates' recommendation, and some other cities we surveyed. Our recommendation for finding 4 is that the city perform an economic analysis following the addition of the 10 permits to determine local cannabis dispensary market demand and whether the 40 dispensaries is sufficient, a sufficient number of permits. In summary, some key questions to consider clarifying are that does the city want to allow ownership and permit transfers? And if so, what is the process to effectuate an ownership or permit transfer? What percentage or level of interest constitutes ownership of a permit, and what percentage change constitutes a transfer? Who owns the permit, a person or an entity? And does an entity change constitute a transfer? And what processes and controls should the city implement to assess beneficial ownership? We understand the city is committed to continuous improvement. We look forward to continuing to work with the city manager's office and the Office of Cannabis Management to ensure that their solutions, which they are already working towards, adequately address the issues identified in this report. The Office of the City Auditor would like to thank the Office of Cannabis Management and the Office of the City Attorney's Office for their time and cooperation during the audit process. This concludes my presentation, and I'm available to answer any questions should you have any. I believe you're on mute, Mayor.
This is a very important audit, an important subject matter for us from every perspective, from an economic development perspective, from an equity perspective, from a appropriate regulatory and ethics perspective. And I think we ought to approach it with the utmost seriousness, as I know we will. I know I've got some fundamental questions, but I would, well, how much public testimony do we have? I guess that's the first question, maybe.
I have 5 callers on this item.
Okay, why don't we hear from the public, and then we'll open it up to council members.
Thank you. First caller, please. Welcome to the meeting. You have 2 minutes to address the council.
Okay.
Hello?
Please address the council.
Hello, Council. My name is Brian Smith.
Hello, Brian. Mr. Smith, I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, why don't we start the clock over so he gets his full 2 minutes? We could not hear. Go ahead, sir.
Okay. My name is Brian Smith. I'm the owner and operator of R&R Collective, Inc. In the audit report, you'll find me on page 57. In the report, I was the first dispensary to pass phase 1. In 2011, the summer of 2011, I was arrested by Elk Grove Police Department. Later, that entire state case was dismissed entirely. The federal government arrested me on federal charges, nothing to do with state law, and I was asking the city if I could resign from the board to continue my permit process with my family, and I was trying to transfer the license to my wife's name. At the time, Brad Wasson would not allow me to do so, and unfortunately, the city at that time said that my permit died with me, that I could not transfer. Later, in finding out that the city allowed every single dispensary to transfer ownership, made me realize that I was treated unfairly and I was mistreated. Due to my incarceration, I became eligible for the CORE program, and I'm a CORE graduate as a result of it. I do think I was treated unfairly given the findings of all the ownership transfers that were allowed by the city of Sacramento. I think the auditor did an amazing job of compelling all the information in the report in front of you today. Nonetheless, I respectfully request that you ask the city manager to get involved and look deeper into my situation with R&R and determine, one, if in fact I was treated differently than other dispensary owners and not allowed to transfer, and then two, look for an equitable resolution to the way R&R was treated by the city. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for the core program, and I hope that you can make a wrong a right with my situation.
So, thank you very much, Mr. Smith. Councilman Schneer, do you want me to take the first crack at this? I know we have looked at this situation, or do you want to? Okay. I would ask the city manager to look into this situation, and I think this is an example of how the inconsistencies in our policies over the course of many years, pointed out in the audit, create a real differential and consequential negative result for an individual. Some were allowed to transfer. Mr. Smith alleges, and I've seen some of the documentary evidence actually in the audit report itself, that he was told pretty clearly that he couldn't do that. And yet he was on the verge of being granted a permit back in the early 2010s. And so this is both illustrative of sort of the equity issues that we faced in terms of the question of ownership transfer among existing permittees versus new core participants, and the way people were treated in the past. And I do think he raises an interesting and potentially worthy issue here that we ought to look at. So I would make that request. Councilman Schneer?
No, I think it spotlights some of the challenges that we've had. So I would just support the request of the city manager just to take a look at it and report back to us on it.
Mayor, I'd like to speak to that item as well, just to that particular piece of Mr. Smith, if that would be okay.
Yeah, go ahead. After Jay, are you done?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, go ahead.
So this is in the auditor's report because I asked Jorge to include it last time Mr. Smith came to council and explained to us what had happened to him. And I first, Jorge, want to thank you for digging into this on behalf of him. And when he explained to me his situation, and all of you know, I'm probably the least likely person on this council to want to add more marijuana to anything, like notoriously vote no on every single thing. But this just seems, forget the industry, so grossly unfair. At the exact same time that he was asking for the transfer and being denied that ability, others were transferring their rights or their titles to other folks for far more nefarious reasons. And I think we need to look into it, but I have asked for us to look into it previously. Perhaps the city manager and city attorney were waiting for the audit, which makes sense. But I had hoped, I guess, Mayor, that somebody would have already spoken with Mr. Smith about this, because I asked for that probably a year ago, specific to him. And I'm disappointed that it hasn't happened, but now he's included in the audit, and it's very clear that there's at a minimum some abnormal transaction that occurred there. So whether or not there's some other circumstances or some other facts involved that maybe created a different outcome that we're just not aware of yet, I don't know. But I would hope that the city attorney's office is already working on this, because we asked about it quite some time ago. So maybe Howard or Susanna, you could give us an idea of what's already been done, because I know it's not new information to you.
So I'm happy to look into it, and staff has been talking with Mr. Smith to include the city attorney's office. I think it'd probably be best if we reported back to this council on what some of those options were provided and what the outcomes were.
I think that would be great. I understand waiting for Jorge's audit. That makes sense and is smart, but I assume you didn't wait to have conversations with him since it was brought forward a year ago.
No.
Yeah. Okay, good. No. All right. Thank you, Howard.
Yep.
Okay, let's continue to hear the public testimony. There's 4 more callers, and then we will turn it over to the council for the broader discussion here.
Thank you. Next caller, please. Welcome to the meeting. You have 2 minutes to address the council. Please turn down the volume on the device you're watching the meeting. It's your turn to address the council.
Sounds good. I got you. I just did.
You have 2 minutes to address the council.
All right.
Please start now. You have 2 minutes.
Good afternoon. This is Nasser Azimi with the Ohana Gardens. We have a delivery operation. I apologize. I got a little bit of a feedback. We have a delivery operation in Sacramento, and I just wanted to make some very quick comments about the topic at hand. Very quickly, the ownership definition, as the audit points out, should be cleared up and well defined so that the council has proper context to make its decision and the vote. As an example, recently I learned that a 0% board member is considered an owner and prevented from owning its own dispensary. So I think there are some ambiguities about ownership transfer in general, and that should be clarified. Secondarily, ownership transfer limitations should not apply to social equity or startup applicants. The policy should be focused on what transpired in Sacramento, which involved a highly capitalized entity potentially demonstrating anti-competitive behavior, which of course can damage competition in the Sacramento cannabis market. I think in this particular case, social equity and startup applicants should be afforded the opportunity to consolidate and participate in ownership. Third point is that the idea of a blanket moratorium or policies with vague definition of ownership are going to put the Sacramento cannabis industry growth behind the curveball, as the rest of the nation is consolidating with legal mergers and acquisitions that are proven in all other industries to power up growth, jobs, and tax revenue. Really would encourage the council to consider policies that would take ownership consolidation one at a time.
Thank you for your comments. Your time is complete. Will you make your final comment, please?
Absolutely. One situation at a time, and most importantly, the ownership transactions that are legitimate, that have already begun, should continue.
Thank you for your comments.
The one that's in the works for Canacare.
Thank you for your comments. Next caller, please. Welcome to the meeting. You have 2 minutes to address the council.
Greetings, Mr. Mayor and council members. This is Malachi Ahmed of the Institute for More. I think it's highly appropriate that the council today has decided to put a moratorium on any ownership transfers so that we can factor in how to go forward with audit recommendations. I also believe we need to be very careful about how we're defining who is a qualified equity program participant, because, you know, we could get into some problems if we're looking at people who recently got arrested, but were able to keep their wealth, keep their homes, keep their families, and keep everything normal. That is not the story of criminalized and racialized enforcement of weed in the country. We see here that dispensaries, according to this audit, have consolidated ownership in Sacramento. They are enjoying a $300 million economic output to the city, as those who were victimized by the war on drugs are languishing in poverty. And so we're highly recommending that the violators of city ordinances have their licenses revoked. We think this is only fair, and if the city is not going to do that, we should be looking at some sort of penalties on an ongoing basis for those who are not core program participants, or not penalties, but necessarily requirements that they pour into an equity fund. that will go into reinvestment into those communities that were impacted, into the businesses that were impacted. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your comments. Next caller, please. Welcome to the meeting. You have 2 minutes to address the council.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Khalil Ferguson. I'm with the United Core Alliance. I would like to first off thank Jorge for presenting this audit. I want to go ahead and bring up just some brief points. The current licensing restrictions only affect core members, as mentioned in the audit, in the retail space, only allowing a core operator one retail dispensary. And while we do not want to encourage monopolies, if an entrepreneur has the capacity and the demand to allow for expansion, they should be able to do so. This should be kept in mind as I put my support behind the recommendation number 6 in the auditor report to conduct an economic analysis on the city's licensing capacity to lift the cap on retail storefront permits beyond the 10 mark to allow us to have the same advantages in this market that others have had prior to the licensing restrictions. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. We have no more callers.
Okay, members of the City Council, let's turn it over to you for discussion. Again, we're receiving this document, but I just want to say from the outset before I weigh in on my substantive comments, I think that this, Mr. City Auditor, is an excellent piece of work. It really is. It is very thorough and it documents all of the issues and begins to give us some guidance around what other jurisdictions have done. But what I'm concerned about, frankly, is that we play the proverbial ping pong game here at City Hall, where because the report does not have a specific set of options or recommendations, that we're going to refer this back to either the staff based upon our input today, which is why I encourage members to be as specific as you can, and or back to the Lawn Ledge Committee, in which case, who's really in charge of developing the set of recommendations and how fast will it be before it comes back to the City Council for a resolution, both for the existing permit holders, but also so that the core applicants know exactly under what set of rules they are going to be entering this new business. And it's the way it is. I understand it, but I think that, you know, if nothing else, the stakeholders here, and in some ways the public, are asking for some real clarity here. I don't see a set of recommendations from anybody. And so part of what we need to answer today is how we can efficiently, thoroughly, but expeditiously come up with a set of recommendations for the City Council, the next City Council, to be able to approve them. So I'd be interested in your point of view regarding process, as well as your your recommendations, as well as your substantive thoughts about the questions raised in the audit. So who wants to go first? Councilman Chenier, why don't you go first?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Baer. There's a number of different pieces of this puzzle, I think, that we need to answer, and however this goes back, whether it goes back to Lawn Ledge, which I think would be fine, or it goes to staff, I think the direction from the council is going to be really important. I want to separate a few issues here, if I can, because I think it's important. I mean, the industry for our city has been important. This year, we have $16 million in business operations tax going into our general fund, and that will only grow over time. So it's a significant source of ongoing revenues for us. It's also a significant source of jobs. I don't have a number overall, but I do agree that having an economic analysis of the industry and its impact on Sacramento would be a worthwhile endeavor for us. So it really behooves us to have a healthy industry, but also to regulate to make sure that laws are not broken and that we are clear about what we want. I want to ask our auditor a couple of questions if I can, Jorge. I appreciate the work. I think you guys have done a very good job and very comprehensive job. But let me ask a couple of questions. Did you find anything? And I know there was a lot of ambiguity in what we did. And I wish that when we started this, which was actually prior to Angelique and I coming on the council, when we started this whole process, I wish there was a manual on what to do with cannabis in a municipality. Unfortunately, there never was, and we had to make up a lot of this as we went along through various staff people as well. And that created challenges, and that's created a lot of ambiguity. But Jorge, did you find anything illegal in understanding people took advantage of the ambiguity? But did you find anything illegal in your work?
Thank you for the question, Councilmember Chenier. This is obviously a very complex subject matter and a complex business. And the objective of this audit report was not to determine the legality of the actions that were taken by the different dispensary owners. I think through the report, you will see that there were actions that were taken by dispensary owners that could be considered potentially out of line with what the city code states. But given the ambiguity of the city code and the changing regulatory environment, it would be very difficult to just broadly state yes or no, there were legal or any illegal type of actions that were taken. I think we've laid out enough areas for improvement that the focus really should be on a path forward, where the city needs to make improvements in the city code to ensure that whatever we settle on in terms of a path forward is something that we can use to hold these dispensaries accountable, adequately regulate them, and ensure that those businesses succeed and strive in the cannabis industry that we have allowed.
Great, thank you. And adequately regulate, that's what the council has to really do a balancing act on, of how much do you regulate. And I don't have the answer to this, but fundamentally, should we be regulating this industry to the extent that we're talking about today? Do you know of any other industries that we put restrictions on ownership in the same way that we might be doing it with cannabis?
Well, we cover a couple of examples in the report. We cover, for example, adult entertainment or gambling or the alcohol beverage restrictions that are put in place. And each one is a different animal, so they're not intended to be apples to apples comparison. But depending on how the regulatory agency wants to address any of those particular types of businesses, it is common to put in place regulations and restrictions to better manage, based on the vision of that regulatory agency, those industries. And so the real question is to what level and how do we want to regulate these businesses? Because there is no right or wrong answer. It's really something that we have to collectively arrive at and then effectuate that vision through our code.
And as far as the ownership pieces go, I know you did look at other municipalities in this industry. Did you find any that restrict the ownership to one or two locations?
Yes, there are some that have moved in that direction. And in fact, Oakland, if I remember correctly, does have a program similar to our core program that they've been also trying to direct some of their newer dispensary permits towards. Obviously, no one entity deals with this exactly the same, but as we mentioned in the report, we believe that there are enough examples out there that we could learn from, that we can leverage that information to customize something that is appropriate for the city of Sacramento.
So Oakland does, just so I understand, Oakland does limit to one dispensary. An owner can only have an interest in one dispensary?
I can pull it up. I know it's in the report. I don't remember the exact number of the limitation, but I do believe there is some. I know Kevin on my staff is also on the line. If you could pull that up and let us know, I think we can get you an exact number here shortly.
Okay, that would be great. So, you know, I don't know, again, I don't know what the answers are on this. I think we need a healthy industry. We need a legal industry. There are restrictions that we put on cannabis that we don't do for anyone else. I mean, Rayleigh's can go open as many stores as it wants and own them all. I guess it really depends on how people think of this as an industry. And, you know, we do a lot of regulation around security and safety and the requirements that we have, both on dispensaries and all of the other operations that people do as well. So I just think that again, we have to make a decision as a council of how strict you want to be around ownership. Should people, and I want to remember that, you know, we can't go back and start revoking permits. We will be in a whole bunch of lawsuits if we do that, because I don't believe that any laws were broken. I believe people took advantage of the ambiguity in our regulations as we move forward. But I think the first decision for this council is, you know, at what level do you want to regulate and at what level do you want to restrict? Once we do that, we can look at the continuum of, you know, maybe you should be able to have 20% ownership in multiple dispensaries. Maybe it's 10%, maybe it's 0. I don't know what that is, but I don't think this is a black and white issue, and it's not a binary decision. I think there's lots of pieces to the puzzle. And so I would also say, when you start talking about ownership structures, in this country, we have many of those. And I would envision, I would think it would be a failed effort to really try to limit those, because not that I think it's the wrong thing to do, but I think that the private industry will always be a step ahead of government in developing new types of ownership structures that we won't be able to really see through. So I just think that you could put a lot of effort into something like that with very little return. Anyway, I'm would look forward to working with you and with Ms. Smith in our cannabis office, and probably our city attorneys, to try to find out what the right level of regulation is, and then how we might be able to enforce that. And happy to take it back to Law and Ledge, Mr. Mayor, if that's the direction the council chooses to go.
Thank you. Thank you, Jay. I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues in a minute, but I want to get in here a minute, because I want to step back for a moment here, because I think that there's a fundamental question that we have to answer before we can provide guidance. And that is, what is our true interest here? If we choose to limit concentration of ownership, what is our interest? Because concentration of ownership cuts both ways when it comes to equity. On the one hand, it raises the specter of unknown big interests kind of taking over the industry. And that can have some negative implications. On the other hand, we know that if we don't do it right, that some of our community-based entrepreneurs may not have the capacity alone and may be prohibited from seeking the partnership of those with capital. And there is another fundamental problem with regulating concentration of ownership in the way that the last 10 years or so have proceeded. And that is like what we did with the moratorium now going forward. Well, no, take that back for a moment. What we when you compare, for example, the new applicants under core with the existing 30 dispensaries, by definition, there is a two-tier system that's set up because the 30 have already taken advantage of the continuity rule. And the new applicants, the 10, by the way, the ones we really want in the business because of our equity drive, are going to have many more limitations in terms of how they can over time build their business. So what is our interest? And I want to say it plainly, what I think the interest it is not in deciding, as Jay implied, what form of corporate structure is best for the city. That's not our business. We're government. Our interest is in making sure, and I don't know how to say this, that nefarious characters do not control a business that is an essential part of our growing modern economy. And that's the only word I can use, is nefarious. Look at the Sacramento Bee's articles of whatever it was, a year and a half ago. That's what raised the concern. Who are these people? What is their source of funding? Is there any illegality involved, as Jay asked? And it's unclear because we don't know, but it certainly raised a worry and a suspicion. So I would pose this question maybe a little bit different to the city auditor and to the city manager and to all of you. If we decided that we were going to have a very limited regulation around concentration of ownership, what kind of transparency tools could we put in place to ensure that we know up front before we issue a permit whether or not, or allow the transfer of ownership, whether or not the purchasers of that ownership or the transferees are not nefarious characters, do not have underworld connections, are not tied into foreign governments that may or may not be allied or enemies of the United States, all of that stuff. That's our interest. Because if there is none of that, and it's transparent and it's clear that there's none of that, then why is it our business? Especially if it could be used to the advantage of our core participants to be able to gain the foothold in the capital. And I certainly would like to hear from the core and the equity coalition. Yes, Malachi, yes, but also the rest of the folks as well, about whether they see regulating concentration to be a benefit to them or a detriment, because the 30 have been able to take advantage of all the concentration in the world while they're not going to be able to. I need to hear from them before I give guidance, because that's going to be really relevant to me. But my question is, are there auditing and or real-time auditing and or transparency tools that allow us to see when a transfer of ownership in any way is being attempted, whether or not the people buying or taking are of good character, that they and that the source of money to fund the enterprise is not something that is either illegal and or going to embarrass the city in some way? Got any thoughts on that, Mr. Auditor?
Yeah. To address your question, I think that's one of the reasons why we looked outside of the cannabis industry to see what others that have a longer history in these types of regulated industries have done to get a better handle on these things. And I think one of the areas that we have to point to that makes sense to me is the gaming industry and what type of disclosures they require in order to approve an entity to do business within their government, and also the consequences of providing inaccurate information to that entity. I think that's one of the things that we probably should keep in mind and maybe build into this process, is that If the city receives inaccurate information or misleading information or something to that effect, there should be a consequence up to and including losing your permit. And that needs to be crystal clear in our code and in the understanding of our operators, that we have a high expectation of those that are operating within the city of Sacramento, and that you will be held accountable to that high expectation. Failure to meet that expectation will have severe consequences. So that's where I think
I would give that direction right now, not as the exclusive direction, but I would like to see some options come back that create the highest level of transparency and requirement of disclosure anytime there is an attempted change of ownership, so that we can all look at it before it is approved. I don't know that the city council should approve every change, but I do think that that's one direction we must go down, regardless of what we decide on the concentration issue, that there needs to be real time, not an audit 6 months after the fact, but real time disclosure of who is seeking to buy in here or to gain control. And then we collectively in some way can judge that for ourselves and make an appropriate decision. Okay, Councilman Guerra.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First, thank you, Jorge, and all of your city auditor staff there for this work. And it's one of those things that right when I came on the council in 2015, the city had approved, I think, the 30th permit at that point. Again, one of the reasons also I appreciate your work in diving deeper into these audits. I think what Mr. Mayor, to your question, what I've heard from not only the city auditor staff here, we spent a great deal of time really diving into this audit, and also from Ms. Smith here. Thank you, Davina and Zara, for your work here. And what's clear is that we need to secure deeper expertise into the complexities of the industry and how to best regulate it. And because these are pretty complex issues, particularly when you're looking at different ownership structures. And I do think that it will take some time to tease out all of those issues. But there are some that I think that the city auditor have put forward that are pretty clear we can start on, such as the disclosure piece. Now, the state's had some, but very limited movement on cannabis policy, and much of it because they've relegated to the local jurisdictions. And so California kind of has ended up with this hodgepodge of policy or lack of policy most of the time. So I think, I would recommend that the city manager look to secure expertise in this area. The city auditor, I think, has identified a few of areas where we could secure that expertise. So I'd ask the city manager to look at that. Before we can even discuss transfers, there's still a question of defining ownership, answering the question of ownership. Those are some of the major highlights of the audit, is how do you define ownership? What types of ownership changes trigger the approval or the transparency process? And then looking at, I think this economic analysis is important, because the question about what are we trying to solve here? If we're creating this core program and the current structure creates an unfair competitive advantage, then we need to know if that exists. So, you could get into the old airplane wars where they drop their prices so dramatically to compete against each other, and then the smallest of the entities could suffer. So, right now no one's flying, but again, that's an example of that you learn in basic economics about what happens with monopoly. So I think we need to find out from this economic analysis, are there any real threats that require the government to come in and regulate that market? And second, I do think that we can learn immediately from some of the current structures such as card rooms, such as the alcohol industry that require disclosures. So Jorge, I want to thank you and your staff for looking into this. And I think we can tease out, you can't replicate the same policy for a different industry, but moving to those immediate disclosure requirements while we secure expertise to better drill down on these other issues is I think the way we need to go. And I also, with Councilmember Chenier, entertain the, bringing it again back to the Law and Legislation Committee and giving the staff the ability to respond to the audit and address those issues identified in the audit.
Okay.
All right.
Councilmember Carr. Councilman Carr? Why don't we go to Councilmember Jennings and we'll come back to Councilmember Carr. Rick, you're on mute.
Can't get off. I'm trying to get off of it.
There you go.
All right, I think I'm off now. Thank you, Mayor. I too want to thank Jorge and his staff on a great piece of staff work. This is not my area of expertise, but I do have a few points that I want to make on this. I think the recommendations are spot on. I'm looking at the recommendations and it gives me a roadmap to understand clarifying the transfer permit process. Councilmember Garrett said before we do that, we need to clarify ownership standards, identifying beneficial ownership, and performing a market study. So it does give me a roadmap as to what I need to do. And then I'm hearing that my colleagues say that it needs to come back to Law and Ledge as the place in order to clarify some of these things. And I think while council meetings are a good place to start the conversation, I think workshops are a better place to strictly focus on this particular area, because it's going to take significant amount of time and work between staff, between Law and Ledge, between council members, between the public, in order to truly understand what we need to do next. Because we need to put some work in to develop a strategic action plan as to how we're going to address these issues of clarifying the transfer permit, clarifying ownership, the beneficial ownership, and performing the market study. And we've got some cities that I saw in the audit that are best practices for us to learn from. And so whether it's and I know we can't do a study mission at this point in time, but whether or not we can really learn from the experience that they've had and bring it into the work that we're doing, I think that has to be a next step. And some of them are right down the street, they're right down the road, right down the highway. I saw the city of Sacramento on there, and a few city of San Francisco, I saw them there. But just trying to get some of the best practices they've had, because they've already gone through this based on what we're going through. So I think us developing a strategic action plan as to what happens next. We now know what we did wrong. And I just want to stop for a second. We talked about Mr. Smith, and we understood the concern, the inconsistency of our policies and the effect that it had on him. I also want to make sure that there are no more Mr. Smiths out there, in addition to the person who had the opportunity to come before us in the council meeting in person, because I remember when he came, and then get on the phone and be able to state his case again to us. I want to make sure there are no more Mr. Smiths out there because of inconsistent policies and equity issues that have highlighted some of the concerns that we see right now with him and the change of his ownership. So I'm a person that this whole process thing is kind of getting to me. Is I see where we are, but I can't see necessarily where we're going. I don't see a clear roadmap as to where we go next. And so my recommendation is that we do take this back to Law and Ledge. We do make this a workshop once we get staff and Law and Ledge talking together to come up with some of the direction that is needed based on these recommendations. And we do take a look at some of the best practices that we've seen in other cities and bring back a group of recommendations that we can all kind of have a dialogue in a workshop environment, so we can have time to talk about this in the workshop as opposed to the council meeting. That's all I got to say right now, Mayor.
Thank you. Are there other members who want to weigh in at this point?
Yeah, Mayor, I have a comment or two.
Yes, go ahead, sir.
Thank you. You know, righting wrongs is not an easy thing to do, but you have to look at where we've come from, where we are now. Regulating an unlawful industry is not easy work. And, you know, if we have made some missteps, it was certainly not intentional along the road. We're trying to protect integrity in an industry at the same time promoting equity, an equity concern that may be undercapitalized. So that's a really difficult set of prospects to manage. You know, the comments from the mayor and my council colleagues have all been, I think, very insightful and valuable. The only thing that we need to be mindful of, or one thing that we need to be mindful of moving forward, is that any policy decisions that we take from this point forward have to be legally defensible, you know, and morally defensible, which I think the mayor was getting at, and the equity concern. So I think process-wise, yes, going back to law and ledge is good. We're going to have to lean on staff, and we're going to have to lean on the city attorney's office also to guide us along the way here, because there are significant sums of money at play. And where there are significant sums of money, there are usually a bank of attorneys close behind. So that's about all I have to say. I think that we can navigate these waters, although they're somewhat choppy. But I'd also like to say that given the conditions that we're thrown into, trying to regulate a substance that is still viewed as unlawful in the eyes of the federal government, we have made some good decisions along the road as well, and created opportunities, certainly for people to get into an industry that is a difficult one to break into. So that's all I have to say, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Mayor Pro Tem Ashby and then Councilmember Carr. I'm sorry, Councilmember Carr, I called on you earlier, but we'll get back to you, okay?
I'll be really quick because actually in terms of direction, so Jorge and Howard and City Attorney's Office, I fully agree with Councilmember Jennings. Everything he said, most of the things that he said, I actually have written down. As soon as you guys started talking, I thought, oh gosh, this is workshop. This is a workshop. It screams workshop. And I know poor Jay, my God, sending it back to law and ledge feels like torture to me, to him, like we're torturing him. This poor guy has been trying so hard on this for a really long time. And Jay, I just want to say to you, I mean, we knew when we came on this council, they had like just taken non-medicinal marijuana, and then you took this bull by the horns, and we knew no one else. So now it's great that Oakland's got something we can look at. But when you started this, there was no one to look at. There was just Sacramento. And you know, I'm proud of us. It's not perfect, and the audit shows all the ways that, you know, there are areas to improve, but I love the way Jorge worded it back to you when you asked him if illegal things had happened. He's like, you know, things that were against what the council asked to have happen happened, but it doesn't necessarily make them illegal. We just need to tighten up the code, be more specific. Now we can, you know, sharpen our pencils a bit and look to the future. I think that's the right attitude to have. And I think giving Jay and crew at Law and Ledge one more swing at it here, and then bringing that to a workshop, as Rick has suggested, is the right thing to do. There's a lot of details in the mix about, you know, and I would suggest Law and Ledge, rather than trying to hone in on one thing, bring us forward, like bring to the workshop maybe some variance suggestions, right? So if we want to get involved, just like you laid out, Jay, you know, if we want to get involved, how deeply do we want to get involved? Here's some things that we could do. Here's one level, here's another level, and then let the council talk about each of those and choose which one they want to do. That way you're not chasing your tail and, you know, we never come to a conclusion on this, because I think now we have enough information that you could lay that out carefully. The thing for me that I just want to point out, I really think we should do that. I hope that's what we do, what Rick, and I think Jay's sort of said that too. I really hope that's where we go with this, because I think that's what needs to happen next. And it feels like we're getting closer to a better solution. The one thing I want to be really careful about, and we can talk about it more during that that workshop is right now, as we have this situated, we are doubling down on making it more difficult for the core members. One, by saying we're not going to hold the first group accountable to the same standard as the core group. That's not really something we're outwardly saying, but it is going to be it's going to be an actual effect of what we do, because we're saying we can't hold the first group to the same standard, but it's the right standard. So going forward, we're going to hold people to that standard, and it's two different standards. That being said, I do think the second standard is right. We just have to think of a way to remedy that with the first group. And Jay's right. We can't go back and take away vested rights, but we have to do something moving forward that creates either a penalty or a fee or a fine or something. We need to look at what others are doing to somehow get the first group in compliance over time. And we can't use, core as both the reason why we can't do the first thing and also the reason why we're doing the second thing. It's like doubly unfair to that group. So we have to get our ducks in a row here and then figure out how we retroactively hold folks accountable, which is hard and challenging and takes time. And at the same time, don't penalize the group in front of us right now. And I'm really glad to hear people talking about, narrowing in on what the right number of dispensaries is, because I feel like that number is going to come back too high. But that's just feelings and emotions, and I would love to have actual data. So that's really all I have in terms of my input and the questions I'll be looking to answer and the angle I'll be taking on it when we do come back in a workshop format to really lay out those exact answers and move forward. And Jay, again, I just want to publicly say thank you. Everyone in Sacramento who's getting the opportunity to work in this field should thank Jay. Because if he hadn't been brave enough to take this on, it just would have been a bunch of no's from the council, primarily me. But he was brave enough to try it, and here we are. And now we're getting closer to the finish line. And Jorge, you always do a great job, but I'm really proud of this audit. I wanted this badly. I think you've done an amazing job of laying out the problem. And my favorite thing about you and your office is you don't think punitively, you think progressively. So you're always looking at how we can do better moving forward rather than going back and punishing everybody. And that is so healthy for our city. So thank you, Jorge, to you and your team.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Councilman Carr.
Thank you, Mayor. I hate to follow Councilmember Ashby because her comments always line up with mine. And I agree with you wholeheartedly that if we're going to do the workshop, it has to be a structured workshop. We can't come in with a blank sheet of paper. It has to be a list of issues that are raised, the options, and more importantly, the implication of each of the options so that we can approach it in an informed way. I think our original sin on this was allowing a monopoly to start with. And there was a lot of pressure because we had these businesses operating in our city without any guidance, without any regulation. So I understand the pressure that was on the council to take a bite of that apple initially, but now we're where we are. And I think Councilmember Chenier kind of phrased it correctly. How are we going to what extent are we going to regulate ownership? Once we decided that we were not going to treat the dispensaries like a 7-Eleven or a used car dealership, that we were going to regulate them more extensively, I think we committed. So what do I want, Mayor? First of all, I want a diverse ownership. I don't want to see anyone gain control of the market. They've done that to some extent already, and it's pushed out people who are cultivating, pushed out people who are delivering, pushed out people who might want to test. So if we're going to regulate it, we're not going to treat it like a 7-Eleven. The number one objective is a diverse ownership. So I'd like to see options on that and implications for each of the options. And the second thing that I would like to see out of this, diverse ownership is one, that those individuals who were adversely impacted by cannabis being illegal benefit from the legalization of that industry. So what I would ask, if we do workshop, if we do law and ledge, I'd rather do a workshop because law and ledge tends to bring back ordinance without us considering the implications fully as a council. And then after we decide on the direction that we want to go, we can have law and ledge actually draft it, or Davina draft it for that matter. So those are the two outcomes that I'm looking for that I think are very important, that that those most impacted benefit and that we have a diverse ownership. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Larry. So I would like to just make a suggestion about how a workshop might be put together here. And if you want to do it through Law and Ledge first, that's fine. I think that the staff together working with the industry, the core folk, the core participants, and Councilmember Chenier and any of us ought to pose, for purposes of the workshop, 3 alternatives. One alternative ought to be no formal limitation on concentration, but with a transparency on steroids. Number 3 ought to be a very strict regimen that limits, that really limits concentration and owning multiple dispensaries. And then the third scenario or option ought to be somewhere in the middle. Because what I would fear would be an open-ended workshop where this discussion that we've had today is repeated. And then the next workshop is a couple of months later. Let's do the prep work to actually center the discussion around 3 potential approaches here that are specific enough that the council, either Law and Ledge or the full council, can react to, and that the community can react to. And then that might lead to an actual direction, because there are no easy answers here. There are choices. And really the choices are along a continuum from very little limitation, but transparency, to significant limitation. And then of course, along the continuum in the middle. Does that sound, Councilman Chenier, like a good way to approach it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a continuum in there. There's lots of questions within each of those.
Right.
But fundamentally, yeah, I think we can approach it along that. You know, what level of regulation do we want? What does that mean? And how would we do enforcement? Because if we put something forward that we could not enforce,
right,
there's no point.
For all 3 of them, there needs to be the enforcement options laid out too. Let me ask Davina Smith and the city manager and Lainey Milstein whether or not that approach, where you actually come forward with 3 approaches along the continuum, is something that you could put together and bring and have this workshop when? Soon after the first of the year. Can't hear you. Davina, we can't hear you.
Okay, so I'm going to hope that I interpret what Davina would say. She'll text me if I get it wrong. I think that a continuum is certainly something that we can consider. We've already been bantering back and forth, having different kind of options on each of the questions around ownerships, around level of transparency, around enforcement. And I think what we would want to do is get with our stakeholders, both current owners as well as core stakeholders, and ask that question so that we come back to you. We have not only gotten some research done on what others are doing, so we can share that with you with comparable agencies, as well as share what our stakeholders are looking at. So you can take that into consideration. I do believe we have a stakeholder meeting coming up in the near term. We can see if we can structure, I'm getting a head nod, those questions into that. And it's coming up later this week on the 11th. or the 12th. I think somewhere January is sufficient. Where we might get slowed down is looking at the details in what others are doing, but that can certainly come later. I think this is about, as Councilmember Carr said, looking at what our options are and understanding the implications of those as decisions are made. But certainly it's a good way to get feedback without being all over the place.
And let me just say one thing, Mayor and Laney, we may want to try to use our December Law and Ledge Committee meeting to work on this. Our membership is going to change after December, and I don't want to start over with folks who haven't been involved in this issue. I think the institutional memory on this is pretty important. So
by all means, feel free to continue it.
I just think as quickly as possible, but do it with real scenarios that allow you to.
No, we get it. I understand, but what I'd like to make sure of is that within a 3 to 4 month period, we can have decisions made by this council, so it doesn't hang people up along the way.
Yeah, and I think we have our dispensary stakeholder meeting is on the 12th, and core stakeholders are on the 19th. So that will inform what we could bring back to LNL in December.
Okay.
Okay, we also don't want to delay the core process though, right? For the 10 applicants.
Not at all.
Delays that. Okay. Good.
January sounds like a good date for a workshop to me.
Okay. Very good.
Mayor, this needs a motion, so I'd be happy to move staff recommendation and accept the audit.
Second.
Good. Let's call the roll, please.
Mayor Pro Tem Ashby,
Yes.
Councilmember Warren,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Harris,
Aye.
Councilmember Hanson,
Aye.
Councilmember Chenier,
Aye.
Councilmember Guerra,
Aye.
Councilmember Jennings,
Aye.
Councilmember Carr,
Great job, Jorge. Yes.
and Mayor Steinberg.
Aye. Okay, thank you. Yes, great job. That I think launches us forward. That's excellent. We do have the second piece of this, which is the next item, which is the work plan for the auditor. Let's hear that.
All right. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Mayor and members of the City Council. Jorge Ceguera, your City Auditor. With me today are members of the team that developed the proposed work plan, including Lynn Bashaw and Nathan Lugo. The recommendation that is before you is that you pass a motion by 2/3 vote to temporarily suspend council rules and procedure. And then number 2, to approve the City Auditor's fiscal year 2020-2021 cannabis work plan. So if we can get the 2/3 vote, please, then we can proceed with going over the plan.
I'm happy to move to suspend the rules to bring it directly to council.
Second.
Happy to second it.
Can you reiterate who made the motion?
Hanson?
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Ashby,
Yes.
Councilmember Warren,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Harris,
Aye.
Councilmember Hanson,
Aye, Madam Clerk.
Councilmember Chenier,
Aye.
Councilmember Guerra,
Aye.
Councilmember Jennings,
Aye.
Councilmember Carr,
Yes.
and Mayor Steinberg.
Mayor Steinberg, we didn't hear your answer.
Aye. I'm an aye. Sorry.
It's okay.
I'm back.
All
Just
right.
okay.
No problem.
Thank you.
All right. So this will be brief. On January 2014 of 2020, the City Council adopted a resolution approving the establishment of a cannabis compliance auditor in the Office of the City Auditor. The cannabis compliance auditor is responsible for continuously monitoring and reporting on areas of risk through frequent and proactive audits of the administration and regulation of the city's cannabis program. On February 2018, 2020, the Office of the City Auditor hired a cannabis compliance auditor who immediately got to work becoming familiar with the city's cannabis program. Primary methods for gaining an understanding included assisting with an ongoing cannabis audit, the one that we just reviewed, investigating cannabis-related whistleblower complaints, and conducting a citywide cannabis risk assessment. The citywide cannabis risk assessment laid the groundwork for development of the cannabis-focused audit plan. As part of the city auditor's annual audit plan, a separate work plan for the cannabis compliance auditor has been established. I am pleased to present to you the fiscal year 2020-21 proposed cannabis audit plan. This is broken up into two sections. One focuses on our continuous monitoring program, which will allow our office to have a continuous presence evaluating and recommending improvements for key cannabis-related activity. The second component lists some more traditional audit projects, which are designed to provide more in-depth analysis and generate recommendations that will strengthen the city's internal control structure. That concludes my presentation, and I am happy to answer any questions that you may have, should you have any.
Okay, members, do you have questions for the city auditor on the work plan? I guess my only question is, can you just go into a little bit more detail about continuous monitoring around compliance?
Sure. So with a continuous monitoring plan, we plan to have a real-time presence in the operations of how the city manages and regulates cannabis. And so we've listed a couple of areas where those continuous monitoring activities will focus. Those include monthly business operation tax payments reviews, reviewing our business permitting process, looking into our cannabis code enforcement efforts. We will review cannabis code enforcement activities for compliance with city cannabis regulations by permitted cannabis businesses, and also the city's efforts at policymaking, education, and community outreach, so that those that have a vested interest in our cannabis industry are well informed, that that information and efforts to get out that information are continuous, and that the council is aware of what those efforts are through our continuous monitoring program.
Yeah, I'm as interested, of course, as if you see a problem of any kind, that the council's alerted right away, as opposed to it being the subject of a later audit where it points out that there was some problem that we might have been able to address if we had had a more active continuous monitoring program around applicants, around permits, around transfers of ownership, around all of that.
Correct. So this will have more regular reporting to council. And if there is an issue that is identified, we will, as quickly as possible, make that known to the council so that corrective action can be taken.
Okay. Good. Other questions, or is there public testimony on this?
I have one caller on this item.
Go.
Thank you. May we caller, please? Welcome to the meeting. You have 2 minutes to address the council.
Thank you. I wanted to first thank the city auditor for doing such a comprehensive job on the cannabis. A couple of recommendations I wanted to just put into play with the council. Consider doing some type of a business professional ethics that we have similar to the real estate industry, maybe doing something like that in the cannabis industry as well. Looking to the DEA and the Food and Ag compliance guidelines to give you some additional depth. I would also look to the state of California for structure as far as businesses and ownership to get a clear understanding and definition of that. I would like to also see some component set aside from the cannabis industry that goes towards use and development, because very similar to the alcohol industry and the cigarette industry, you're going to have some after effects and some negative components of this particular industry. So I would look to you to set aside some type of resource to address that. The last thing is I'm concerned about shell companies, ownership, and having shell companies go for some of the permits and some of the work plans ahead of time and then transferring it to others who are looking for opportunity. We're going to have a lot of opportunities coming to the city of Sacramento in the next few years, and I'd like to see that the youth don't lose out on that based on cannabis being such an economic viable trade.
Thank you for your comments. I have no more callers.
Council questions or comments?
Councilmember Jennings?
Thank you. Jorge, I just one quick question, and this kind of ties into the mayor's question on the continuous monitoring. I see on the finance department, it tells me on a monthly basis that's going to happen. But then when I look at the business permitting and the cannabis code enforcement activities and the cannabis policy making, education, and community outreach, it says continuously monitoring. And so that term is kind of ambiguous to me. I'm not quite certain what that means. So maybe you can help define that for me. Is that a monthly? Is that quarterly? You know, tell me what that means.
We're going to be, for example, with the business permitting process, asking for regular reporting on the business permitting activity so that we can have real-time access to the activity related to that, provide some review of that information. And then as we get a better handle on what this continuous monitoring workload is like, we'll determine with what regularity to report back to council on what those reviews have unearthed, if anything at all. And so that's the intent, is to have regular reporting to our office regarding these different areas of activity so that we can evaluate them and land on an appropriate amount of reporting to council regarding what it is that we've reviewed.
Would it be safe to say that at least on a quarterly basis, we would be able to get some kind of report in these three areas?
I think, yes, initially that's a target, is at least quarterly, but depending on what we see and to be timely, as the mayor has suggested, it may be more frequent than that.
Right. So my suggestion, just from a terminology standpoint, is at least quarterly and on an as-need basis. That kind of opens the door for all the opportunities for you to be able to report back, and it defines what continuously monitoring means for me. Okay?
Yep. Thank you.
Okay. Very good. Anybody else? All right. Do we need a vote on this?
Yes, we do.
Yes, please.
Okay, let's call the roll.
Do you have a motion in a second?
Oh yeah, I thought it had been moved. I'm sorry. Motion and a second. Go ahead. Somebody?
Rick
I'll
Jennings.
move it. Second.
Moved and seconded by a variety of members. Please call the roll.
I have a motion by Councilmember Hanson and a second by Councilmember Jennings. Mayor Pro Tem Ashby?
It was the other way around. Moved by Rick, seconded by Steve. Yes, from Ashby. Okay.
Councilmember Warren?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Harris?
Aye.
Councilmember Hanson?
Aye.
Councilmember Chenier?
Aye.
Councilmember Guerra?
Aye.
Councilmember Jennings?
Aye.
Councilmember Carr?
Yes.
And Mayor Steinberg?
Aye. Okay, thank you. Let us now move on to item number 22 on portable leaf blowers.
Good afternoon, Mayor Steinberg and members of City Council. I'm here today to present an ordinance adding Chapter 8.70 to the Sacramento City Code, relating to portable blowers. The ordinance will ban blowers on certain times and days based on the air quality index according to the Sacramento Metropolitan Air Quality Management District's website for current conditions using the downtown T Street meter location that measures the real-time air quality index for particulate matter 2.5. The ordinance as proposed would ban the use of all blowers when the particulate matter 2.5 reaches 101 or above, as this is the level that is determined to be unhealthy to sensitive groups. On average, this happens approximately 34 days per year in the city. On these days, it will be prohibited to use all blowers within the city of Sacramento. Since the ordinance was presented to the Law and Legislative Committee on October 13th, we initiated outreach to Chamber of Commerce's, PBIDs, industry, SAC Act, air quality, and city departments. A webpage was also created to provide updates and information. If the ordinance is passed, the next steps would be to create an informational flyer to get out to all licensed landscapers and gardeners within the city and follow up with other resources for follow-up and outreach, including things like push notifications, web alerts, and highlights on our webpage to give real-time AQI numbers. I'm joined by Senior Deputy City Attorney Bo Parkus. If there's any questions, and that concludes my presentation.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Is there public testimony on this item?
Yes, I have one caller.
Okay.
May we have the first caller? Welcome to the meeting. You have 2 minutes to address the council.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Bill Hoover, and I'm president of the Sierra Curtis Neighborhood Association. First, I would like to thank that SCNA is very much supportive of restrictions on the use of leaf blowers, and we applaud Councilman Harris's efforts in this regard. Our primary concern is the language in the ordinance that would require hourly or greater self-monitoring. However, based upon recent conversations with Councilman Harris, it appears that was not his intent. Apparently, his intent was to use forecast-based monitoring linked to spare the air criteria. If the ordinance can be amended to reflect that intent, that would certainly resolve our primary concern. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for your comments. I have no more callers.
Okay. The Vice Mayor, I think, brought this forward. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mayor. So I'd like to clarify the intent of this ordinance. It was really in response to the fire events that we've been having. I think that you have all seen leaf blowers numerous times blowing up billowing clouds of dirt into the air, really not blowing leaves at all, but just moving particulate matter from one place to the next, where it settles and is not collected. This may, serve the purpose of cleaning one area, but usually at the detriment of another. I know you all have washed your cars an awful lot of times because of leaf blowers. And I know if you're a cyclist, you have cycled through clouds of these dust clouds like this as you were riding your bike. This is about public health and really nothing else. As Peter mentioned, there are only about 34 days of year historically where the AQI exceeds 101. When I went to Peter and said, let's create an ordinance to curtail the use of leaf blowers to protect the public health, but let's build something that is actually enforceable. We talked about bans on certain days. We looked at many other jurisdictions that have banned leaf blowers outright, some because of two-stroke engines, some because of noise and nuisance. But we took it in a different direction, which was really to protect the public health. When the air quality is bad, as it was many days this year, with air quality above 200, which is in the very much the unhealthy range. And during the campfire, it exceeded 300, which was in the dangerous range. During all of those days, I observed people using leaf blowers and adding to the particulate matter in the air. So this ordinance is relatively benign, in my opinion. We tied it to the AQMD standard of air quality, PM 2.5, to address the specific issue of pulmonary health. A lot of people in Sacramento suffer from asthma and severe allergies. As well, we're in a COVID pandemic, and the extra load on lungs can, and data will show this, expose people to more susceptibility to COVID and perhaps even worse symptoms of COVID because they have these pulmonary issues caused by particulate matter in the air. Sacramento air quality is some of the worst in the nation. And this won't solve our air quality issues, but on days when things are really bad, I think that it will help. We looked at this, from a lot of different angles. This is the result of about 2 years of talk. And I think that we have a lot of community support from ECOS, from the Mo Better group. Most people seem to be in favor of this ordinance. I hope that my colleagues will agree that the intent behind the ordinance is good and the solution to get there is workable and enforceable and not punitive. This is really an education campaign just strictly meant to change behavior. On only 1/12 of the days of the year when there are negative repercussions to using a leaf blower, this is the result we came up with. There is always the outstanding equity issue. We know that a lot of people, and generally low wage earning people, work in the landscape industry and make their living this way. This is not meant to punish them or put them out of work, and we don't believe it will. During those days when leaf blowers are restricted, you can use rakes, shovels, and brooms to affect the work. Maybe this might, transfer some load to the homeowners for whom they work. They might have to charge just very incrementally more a few days per year, but we don't think that the burden is undue. And we think that the health benefits associated with this ordinance are worth its passage. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Guerra.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I want to first thank Vice Mayor Harris here for working on this issue and taking the time to take the equity issues seriously here and on the forefront of it, and also working with a lot of the industry, talking to the businesses that are impacted by it. One of the things that I want to make sure that happens as we move forward. So, Councilmember Harris, if you were going to move this item, I'd hope that you'd move it with some staff direction also to look at developing the outreach strategy because many of the businesses that are impacted, and again, this applies to not only businesses but homeowners too, are predominantly Latino, many Spanish speaking, and so being aware of the ordinance is important. My role on the air district as chair of the air quality management district, the efforts that we've taken throughout the county to reduce particulates have improved Sacramento's air quality, and we still find ourselves many times violating the federal attainment levels. And so we still got a long ways to go to addressing the impacts of air quality. And when we look at air quality, it doesn't stop in one area, as Councilmember Harris mentioned. It spreads around, and particularly on days that are terribly bad. This is something that is limited. It doesn't stop the work. Let's make that clear. Gardening doesn't stop because of the air quality day. It just means you can't use that leaf blower that day. So work still will happen. Lawns will still be mowed. Trees will still be trimmed, but the use of the actual leaf blower is what we're trying to reduce. On the bigger picture, though, I mean, the current challenges right now with the 2-cycle motor is an issue. I mean, this is the dirtiest type of pollutant where you're burning gas and oil at the same time, strapped to somebody's back, and the particulates around a person is pretty dangerous. So I hope that with our economic goal, our economic climate goals, that we start looking at how do we push for the development of manufacturing of some of those products here. How do we look at more of the electric products that don't require workers to have two-cycle engines strapped to their back where they're exposed to those particulates? Some wear masks, others don't. But I think that's a bigger picture that we have to solve. This, I think, is a modest approach, working with the Air District to maintain those efforts. So I'm glad to support it, but only if it includes the direction of having a very robust outreach effort to work with those businesses, many who may not be located in the city of Sacramento, but come into the city of Sacramento to operate. They might be located in unincorporated areas. So, it's you took the leadership on this, council member Harris. So if you want to make the motion with that direction, I'd be glad to second it.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. Mayor, if I could follow up.
Yeah.
It was absolutely our intention in all outreach to do it in a bilingual or perhaps trilingual way. There are many Asian people who participate in gardening as well. We want to be able to reach everybody. Again, this isn't punitive, and perhaps Peter can address a little bit more specifically about outreach but more than that, about the way we would do warnings before citations, because this is not meant to punish people, it's meant to change behavior. And that being said, I would certainly like to move adoption of the ordinance with that direction. Peter?
Yes, sorry, I did not cover the enforcement part of it as I should have during the presentation. So our enforcement we're going to be complaint driven. We would respond to complaints as they come in through 311. All of our initial contacts are going to be outreach and education. We've already organized and put together the website. So if you went to cityofsacramento.org/blower ban, the website's already started to be built and it's already in operation. And if the ordinance passes, then that's where you'll catch all of the updates and changes. And that's where we'll be able to get translations, work with our other vital resources that we have. But yes, the impact of our enforcement is going to be education and outreach. If it had to go to enforcement, we'll follow 1.28, which includes also a warning process. So that would be the process we move forward.
And I'll second that motion, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Are there any other members that, Councilman Carr, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Jeff, a couple of questions for you. One, the air quality index, where would one go to find whether or not it was unhealthy?
So I'm going to turn that to Peter, because this was the subject of much discussion between Peter and our city attorney. So Peter, can you address that one?
Sure. So the easiest way, and I actually just put the app right on my phone, is with the Sacramento Metropolitan Air Quality Management District's website. So if you went onto there and went to current conditions, and it will take you to the locations that measure live time by the hour, and it also forecasts on that website. We're going to work in the future of also adding this to our webpage for blowers and to our City of Sacramento website to make it an easy link to go directly to the page.
Does the air quality change by the hour?
The monitoring station that we're using at T Street monitors it hourly. So there is a delay, but that's the only one in Sacramento that monitors particulate matter 2.5 hourly. So you can get the projections early on, but if you wanted to know exactly where you're at for the day, that's going to show you hourly. There is a little bit of a delay there, but not like the other reporting stations. So I've seen up to 1 to 2 hour delays, and that's the most I've seen when we've been monitoring it for the last 5 months.
Using the index, you could be allowed to blow at 9 a.m., but not 10 a.m. Is that right?
Correct. If we went just by forecasted model, there'd be days that are just banned. Using the index, you're actually allowing the industry to operate a few more hours on days before it turns bad, or if there was a day that it wasn't projected, and then we had a fire or something started, that could change throughout the day. So there is a method in place for people to see what the live air quality is.
My question was, would you be allowed to use a leaf blower at 9 a.m. and the air quality change, and you not be allowed to use it at 10 a.m.?
Larry, that is a conceivable scenario.
Yes.
You know, it is a changeable situation. However, you know, not to put too fine a point on it, it's not like we have a legion of code enforcement officers who are going to hour by hour look for people in violation of the ordinance. This is really geared towards days when, you know, there are events happening. In the wintertime when people are burning in their fireplaces and the air quality tends to stay above 101 for protracted periods of time. Yes, there will be times where there's some ambiguity. Again, our intention is not to watch this like a hawk and enforce it. It's really more about dealing with the projected air quality, which as we saw this year, was projected day by day, you know, into the unhealthy range. And that was what we're trying to sort out. You know, admittedly, it's not perfect, but in this instance, I would not let the perfect get in the way of the good. There's no way to sort it out hour by hour, and it certainly wouldn't be our intention to curtail the use of leaf blowers, you know, certainly in the commercial sense, or even for homeowners. If things are changing hourly, right around the 100 mark, you know, going up a little, going down a little, that's really not what this ordinance is about. But you have to finally settle on a metric to work with. And this is where we landed.
Well, which brings me to the other question. Why didn't we use spare the air days as the metric?
Spare the air days are more tied to ozone than particulate matter. So our focus here was, again, in reaction to fire events and days where, you know, we have inversions and, you know, the air quality is dank. Dealing with the ozone problem, you know, that gets more to the gas emissions. And Eric brought this up. Two-stroke motors are notoriously dirty and add more greenhouse gases to our atmosphere. But I didn't want to take that on. I feel that that is better handled by our California Air Resources Board, who are looking at that very issue and trying to find regulations to move the industry towards electric powered equipment. But, you know, that's a bigger jurisdiction and a bigger issue. This was really, again, more geared towards the health aspect of PM 2.5.
So we will have on our website in multiple languages a place where a gardener could go to see whether or not we're over 100 very easily.
Well, that, yes. Peter, the answer is yes, correct?
Yes, that's the goal, to make it as easy as possible. There's going to be numerous ways of doing it, and finding the way that's best for them. So as we, all of our licensed gardeners, so we already know licensed landscapers and gardeners in the city, we have 379 of them. So immediately we'll get information out to them with links to our website, links to other ways they can get it daily without having, you know, if they don't have internet base, of trying to just get that information available to everyone. You know, it's going to be a curve of learning.
Okay.
And that website that's available now, if we pass this today, tomorrow, that's available to not only the 389 licensed landscapers, but also the unlicensed ones?
Yes, the website is active and live now. It has links to the SAC air quality. So that is already active now. We need to make this website available to bring the information forward. Right now, it's going to take them to the website, and they're going to have to do a little bit of work at this time because the air quality changes from having the particulate matter 2.5 on the front to ozone at this time of year. So there's instructions there of how to do it, but we want to make this even easier in the future. So yes, right now, if you went to just cityofsacramento.org/blower ban, you're going to go straight to the website we've already started creating with the FAQs. And then we did a webinar on the 5th. That will also be on there in the future within the next week or so. We recorded the webinar.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilman Jennings.
Thank you, Mayor. I think Councilmember Carr just asked a couple of my questions about the monitoring of the process. And I think the question I wanted to ask is on the forecast. Is it possible, just like we do with the weather, that we can actually forecast 4 to 5 days out in advance?
I think actually, Rick, the answer there lies with the air quality district, and they generally only forecast 2 days ahead for PM 2.5. I think it would be difficult to forecast that far out.
And all I'm saying is, even if I got 2 days ahead, that allows for better planning for the people who are out there doing the work. I just had this conversation with my gardener based on my support for this item. And I told him on the 34 days that potentially the air quality index gets above 101. Those are the days that you do not blow or cut lawn or anything. Those are the days that you prune and you cut back the bushes and the trees and all those other things that don't require a blower or any motorized engine machine. And so we just had this conversation. He thought it was a great idea. And so I say all that to say that this is an education campaign, because we're changing the way that they do business on a day-to-day basis. And it is an educational campaign. We're going to have to make sure that we do the outreach and the education. It sounds like you're on the right track, but we're also, this is a health focus. It's a public health issue. And I support this wholeheartedly, even to the point of having had the conversation with our gardener already on what we can do to change the way we work together, so that they don't feel like they're not doing the work that they've been asked to do by the constituent. So I'm 100% behind this. I think you're on the right track. You're right. We got rakes, we got shovels, we got brooms, we got all kinds of ways. And this even got me out into the backyard to spend 4 hours to do some additional cleanup over and above what the gardeners had not done. When they came by today to see what had happened, I said, see, I'm just showing you leading by example. I'm showing you what you can do on those days when you can't use the blower. So I'm 100% behind this. I support it wholeheartedly. Good job, Councilmember Harris. Thanks for bringing this forth. And I'm ready to support this.
Very good. Thank you. Councilmember Ashby.
Thanks, Mayor. Just a couple of quick questions. One, this doesn't affect leaf vacuums, right, Peter?
Correct.
Correct, it
Okay.
does not.
I would love it if we could, if like in a next step, we could work with SMUD to do an incentive program where people trade in their blowers for leaf vacuums. And then we kind of, like they've done with electric lawn mowers and other things like that in the past. I think that would be great. Also, I'd like to point out that the Air Quality District has an app that's really easy to use. So people who are out in the field, I mean, I've had that app on my phone and used it all during the fires. And one of the things I think we could educate people on, because they're obviously out in the field, is that they could just have that app on their phone. It's really easy to pull up that J Street site and see what the air quality is at any given time. And they would be able to see in the morning, you know, when they go to work, what the day is going to look like and be able to choose their tools accordingly. I am totally going to support this. I think it's great. The leaf blowers are something that we all get calls about. When I represented the area where Councilmember Hansen lives, I heard about this all the time. So I don't know if he still does or not, but holy cow, that neighborhood has strong feelings about this issue, and he'll have to deal with that. But I do have some concerns about enforcement. I've heard what you've said. It sort of reminds me of our tree ordinance, which I also support wholeheartedly. It is violated all the time. Because folks hire somebody to come out, they cut down a tree, they didn't reach out to the city, and our ability to go back and correct that is fairly limited. So I feel like there are a few things like this, the tree ordinance being one of them, that we could continue to seek out ways to do a better job of educating folks that they exist and how they can be compliant, and figure out what sort of set of remedy penalties there would be for folks as we get that information out into the hands of the people who are doing this work. So, but Jeff, I think it's a good ordinance. I'm glad you brought it forward. Thank you.
All right, we had one more member here, I think. Who was it? Councilman Hanson.
Thanks, Mayor. And Angelique's absolutely right. People in the central city hate leaf blowers. There's a lot of different rental property owners, and their gardening teams come at all different times of the week. So it can be complicated. I think there are a few things here. I'm happy to support the ordinance, but I said at Law and Ledge, I think that there's a way to bring a little bit more tranquility to this. One is, I think if we can, to try to get most folks who have commercial gardening services to come the day before green waste pickup, so that at least it's not every day of the week there's a different set of blowers going on your block. And that's what we see. We see somebody who's got someone coming Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, maybe even Sunday, all in the same stretch. And it'd be nice to try to arrange it around when green waste pickup is, so that it's less chaotic. And that's one of the things that people complain about. The second thing is, and I talked about this at Law and Ledge as well, is we really need to, as much as people might dislike leaf blowers, there is a reasonable purpose for them, and there's a useful purpose for them. So I think one of the things we have to get to, and Angelique sort of touched on this as well, is how do we get people to convert to electric? These two-stroke engines, they're extremely loud, they pollute heavily, and the Mayor's Climate Commission, which I know we have an item on a little bit later, really focused on, as well as I think it's an issue at the state level now, how do we get rid of these two-stroke engines and get electric leaf blowers, electric mowers as a standard? So I think the noise reduction, the reduction in pollution will also reduce the number of complaints. And the final thing I would just say is, I've talked to our yard service a few times. A lot of times they come in and they hit it with the highest setting. And almost any person who understands, if you hit dirt with the highest setting, it's going to blow into the air. So what I've encouraged our folks to do, and maybe part of the residential education piece, the homeowner or the rental property owner, is to work with your landscaping company on using the lower settings. You don't need hurricane speed to move a few leaves. You can just use city council hot air speed to move the leaves. And you know, I think that there's a way that we can educate.
I resemble that remark.
It's called
there's a way that we can educate everybody about being good neighbors. And I think Peter and his team are often put at the cross section of angry neighbors. And it's great if we can use it as a way to educate rather than just to penalize. And so I'm happy to support this. This is a step forward, but it's not the end of the conversation by any means. And I'm glad that we're taking this step.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there other comments from the members? There is a motion and a second as amended by Councilmember Guerra, accepted as a second in terms of direction around outreach, which I know was going to happen anyways, but it reinforces the point. Let's call the roll on the ordinance.
Mayor Pro Tem Ashby,
Yes.
Councilmember Warren,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Harris,
Aye.
Councilmember Hanson,
Aye.
Councilmember Chenier,
Aye.
Councilmember Guerra,
Aye.
Councilmember Jennings,
Yes.
Councilmember Carr,
Yes.
and Mayor Steinberg.
Aye, very good. Thank you very much, Vice Mayor. That's unanimous, 9-0. All right.
Can I just say thank you to my colleagues? I appreciate it.
Very good. All right, let us move now to the last item on the agenda today, and that is the update on the Mayor's Commission on Climate Change Recommendation. I just want to make a brief opening comment, and then I'll turn it over to Jennifer. First of all, I want to welcome Jennifer Venema, who we all know, but who is now the interim climate action lead for the city. And I want to thank the city manager, Howard Chan, for taking the direction of the city council and the hard work of the Climate Commission lay volunteers from the community who put in endless numbers of hours developing these recommendations. And I think, Mr. City Manager, you sent a really strong and important signal by getting on the case right away and appointing somebody with the respect and the skill of Jennifer Venema to lead this effort. We know that Jennifer previously led the city's electric vehicle programs in public works, including the Electrify America $40 million investment, and that she brings great technical expertise, passion, and knows how to work with people to bring this large initiative with many subparts forward. So I'll speak later about some of the specific items, but let me now turn it over to Jennifer. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor and council members. It's a pleasure to be here and to be talking about these big and exciting issues. Now, I am sharing my screen. You should be able to see a PowerPoint presentation. Just interrupt me if that is not the case. So as Mayor Steinberg introduced, I am here serving in an interim capacity to lead the city's climate efforts. We've been working on the direction that council provided on August 25th, and we've been preparing to come with an update in early December, but because of the great enthusiasm and the great interest from everyone, we were asked to come earlier, which we're really happy to do. So this is a discussion item and an initial update for you to give us feedback, recognizing we're working to bring you more in the month of December. Lastly, before I get into the presentation, I just want to acknowledge that although I am in this position to lead and coordinate, this is a very collaborative effort that still involves many of our city departments. So with that, just for a quick recap, again, we're here because of the extensive work of the Mayor's Commission on Climate Change, which was convened over nearly 2 years. And we want to acknowledge Councilmember Hansen, who served on the commission. It was not an official city body, but a really important collaborative effort with stakeholders from business sectors to the environmental interests and more. These icons you can see help to illustrate the great range of topics, which you heard about on August 25th. Just a reminder, those cover everything from energy use in buildings to urban forestry, food access, and transportation. So from this great foundation is really how we're moving forward and building the city's efforts. So now what I'm going to walk through is the status of the effort, specifically what was discussed by council on August 25th. This is a very high-level overview. There's much more detail in the attachments of your staff report. I'm happy to take more questions after the presentation. So first, looking at the 10 items in the council motion that was passed on August 25th, 6 of those items are underway or completed. And that equates to an approximate dollar investment from existing budgets and vacant positions of about $920,000. So we are very committed to implementation with a lot underway. And just to put a finer point on that, as many of you know, we're very busy working on a number of things. First off, we've got the all-electric ordinance and process for new construction. Our community development team has done a fantastic job. They put a framework to law legislation on September 29th. We're bringing this framework forward with some updated information on Thursday of this week to the Planning and Design Commission. Outreach is ongoing, and we plan to bring a draft ordinance by later this year or early 2021 with the intention of bringing that for council adoption in March of 2021. Very important to note here, although we're moving quick on an ordinance, we're working with our stakeholders, specifically workforce and business, to ensure we have a phased approach. We are recommending that the effective date of the ordinance is not until early 2023, which gives us time for lots of onboarding and continuing to work with all stakeholders. Now, we are also working on EV capability standards as a part of this code. The city has allocated $750,000 that will support RT for the ride-free program in year 2. Also, really important to note, the city manager's committed $25,000, which the city will invest as a seed investment for nonprofit work to launch the Environmental Justice Collaborative Governance Committee, which was one of the real priorities coming out of the Climate Commission. Council members also requested an update on the timing for the Urban Forestry Master Plan. We're pleased to report we're very close to a public draft, and we will have that ready in January 2021 for public review and feedback. Now, when we look at the next bucket of items from the 10 priority actions that Council gave us, there's 4 of those which still need more work. We think at minimum, these would likely require at least $750,000 or more, but we're continuing to refine these efforts. We will talk more about slow streets next, but just want to highlight that we are working with utility partners. We are looking at how to accelerate green job strategies and also linking with an inclusive economic development strategy which is currently in draft form, and staff's preparing to bring that in early 2021, I believe, to City Council. And of course, across all of these, prioritizing multilingual access and education. Now for slow streets, this was an item of discussion recently at Council. We're here to provide more information and options. We have a lot more detail in attachment 4 of the staff report. So here is the preliminary information that we continue to review. We've worked on this. This is the outcome of a lot of evaluation and work of the city's transportation team. I'm joined here tonight by Ryan Moore, our Public Works Director, and we're happy to take any questions. First off, just want to note that the process to get here is collaborative. We know there's strong interest from a number of community organizations and neighborhoods. We've been working with them, working with other cities to learn from their experience. The transportation team has done a lot of work to vet potential streets and to develop a process for how we would move this forward. Also, we are very close to figuring out, again, what that engagement for communities would look like. Staff is exploring a 15-minute neighborhood option as well, which would give us a longer-term path for community planning, for long-term improvements. And what we're doing, recognizing there's no standard, even though other cities have done this, is really, again, evaluating how we roll this out, looking at issues such as signage, how much protection would be required on the roadways. And what we're working to do is to come back in December to City Council to incorporate this with our year 1 recommendations. Now, also, we recognize that the Climate Commission had a very big list of year 1 commission projects, not all of which were covered in the motion from City Council, which really got us to those near-term milestones to move forward on. But we have looked across the range of recommendations from the Commission report. A number of these on your screen are already underway, from food recovery, looking at marginalized populations, launching car share in partnership with the Air District, for example, and some of the policy efforts will be addressed through the general plan. But what you see is an estimated gap of at least 14 million if we were to move forward with all the projects as recommended, but we know that more work is needed to refine this. The largest share of estimated costs would be number 6, the neighborhood level active transportation audit, which we're working on customizing what scalable approach looks like for that action. Now, to move forward, in order to refine all of this great work and the recommendations, how are we going to do this? What you see on this screen just helps to illustrate the various sources and recommendations we're considering. Across the top, you can see various resolutions, projects, or efforts that are underway. And across the left side of your screen, you see range of key topics that come from these various sources, from food systems to how the city's organized and manages these projects to investment in electrification. All of this is part of our process to get to recommendations that we're bringing back to council in December. December 8th is the date we're targeting, and we are coming together with Jorge Aceguera and his team to present both the Green Efforts audit that Jorge's team has been working on, along with our recommendations of how we move forward. So we have a great foundation to build from. And jumping back to the year one work plan here, this is where we're bringing all of the recommendations and information forward to focus on an actionable work plan for 2021, where we will identify staffing and resources needed, recommendations based on all the work done, what we know, the work that's underway, and really focusing on those actionable priorities. We know a couple of those include, for example, the Environmental Justice Committee recommended by the Climate Commission and all of the work that's underway on the electrification ordinance. In order to develop the work plan, we're very mindful of the criteria that's laid out in both the commission work and other city projects. And this is just a sample of some of the prioritization factors that we'll be thinking about to bring you the recommendation on December 8th. And that brings us to our conclusion. Just to recap, we are pulling this together into an implementation plan we will bring for council consideration, targeting again the date of December 8th, coming along with the Green Efforts audit. And we're looking forward to your feedback and any initial direction or other priorities you'd like to highlight today. And with that, I'm happy to answer your questions.
Mayor, you're on mute.
Thank you, Councilmember Hanson. We have 6 callers, and we'll get to them in a moment. And I want to go through some of these items after, again, I hear from the public and the members. But I do want to touch on one right away because it's one where I think we can provide some specific direction, and that is on this issue of slow streets. This is a very exciting concept. And I know that our Director of Public Works has been working together with others to suggest this idea of 15-minute streets, which actually sounds visionary to me, but will take a long time, I think, to be able to accomplish that. In the meantime, I know I would like to see some action on this issue of creating streets that are designated by the neighborhoods themselves, that are closed to vehicle traffic and that are for pedestrians and bicyclists. And I would like to see if there are some neighborhoods, and I think that there are, that would love to pilot this, including some form of self-governance in terms of how they maintain the safe streets. What can the city do to get started here? I'd like us to come back, Mr. City Manager, with a suggested appropriation of, say, about $100,000, so that the city could purchase the equipment, the cones, and all the other infrastructure, continue the work that we, in the conversations that I know Jennifer and my team and district council members are having with some of the neighborhood associations, and see if we can get started right away, no later than, say, the first part of calendar year 2021, with actually starting the Slow Streets movement, so that as we build up to the broader vision and the idea of 15-minute streets throughout the city, that we're actually demonstrating in real time what we may need to adapt or tweak along the way. And so that we're not just waiting for the ultimate, we're actually piloting and getting started with this. I would appreciate that as one of the items for council consideration. on the 8th of December. Let's hear from the public, and then we'll go around to the council. Madam Clerk? Hello?
The clerk is apparently muted as well, Mayor.
Yes. Madam Clerk, you're on mute. I wonder if we might open up the phone lines to the 6 callers. There may be a technical glitch here.
Afternoon, everybody. My name is Deb Banks, and I'm the Executive Director of SABA. And if I just heard you right, I heard you say that you wanted city to allocate $100,000 to start right away on slow streets.
Yes.
I could not be happier to hear this news. Thank you so much. Fabulous. I'm also calling today to take the next steps needed to make the recommendations for the Mayor's Commission on Climate Change a reality, starting with active transportation. You know, cities around the world are reimagining their streets as a result of the pandemic. And what they're learning is that people enjoy having streets for walking and rolling, not only for cars, which have been dominant mode for transportation. Lots of cities have adopted the slow streets, which we think we're going to get here pretty darn soon in Sacramento. And we're thrilled to hear that. And SABA stands ready to help identify streets in neighborhoods. But in addition to slow streets, we urge you to think bigger and bolder. City leaders and planners around the world are using the pandemic as an opportunity to put people at the center of their transportation agendas, not cars. And in doing so, they're scoring a win for cleaner air. So we urge you to make active transportation a priority. We know that slow streets isn't an end-all be-all, so it's time to engage with the citizens and what they need in their communities. We need the city to facilitate a comprehensive neighborhood-level audit to identify sufficient active transportation infrastructure so that in 2021, investments can be prioritized in high injury corridors. Given the past uneven investments in underserved communities, we urge you to move forward with updating the Transportation Master Plan. Last night, I completed the Citizens Planning Academy, and I learned a lot. It was a really great experience, and I'm really thrilled to have been able to be a part of it. One of my takeaways was that most of the planning activities at the city occur in silos. So for an updated master transportation plan to be
Thank you for your comments.
comprehensive-
Your time is complete. Will you make your final comment, please?
Yep, that I expect and hope that the master transportation plan will have input from the Environmental Justice Commission and the Transportation Equity Group and all the transportation planners. Thanks much for your time.
Thank you for your comments. Next caller, please. Welcome to the meeting. You have 2 minutes to address the council.
Hi, my name's Rosie Yakub. I'm a resident of District 4, and I support the movement the city is taking towards the recommendation of the Climate Commission report. In particular, it's good to see the city moving forward with an electrification ordinance, joining dozens of other cities in California. I noticed some concern from the pipe fitters in the comments about this, but I want to emphasize that in our move towards clean energy, there will be increased needs for conduit piping in electrified buildings, installing solar and installing HVAC systems, regardless of the energy source. So as we move forward towards electrification, both in new construction and retrofits, there are opportunities for more work. On the balance, electrification, solar requirements, increased energy efficiency create safer buildings and can create jobs. And there could be other opportunities for pipe fitting in water conservation needs with rainwater and gray water systems, especially if that's supported by the city. All that said, I did contribute to and was present when the council voted to approve a climate emergency declaration that recognized needs for changes by 2030. I want to point out that everything is in place to step up the timeline on electrification earlier than 23 and 26. Cost efficacy studies have been done. There are other cities that have crafted examples. Both of our utilities are ready for the change, and there are developers in the area who have already done all electric construction. every year we put off new building electrification, we have more buildings that will need to be retrofit. And this causes renters and mortgage payers to shoulder expenses that could have been part of construction. In sum, very exciting to see moves towards electrification. I applaud all that. I want to say, if you are serious about the promise you made to eliminate emissions by 2030, please consider moving the timeline up on this very important part. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next caller, please. Welcome to the meeting. You have 2 minutes to address the council.
Thank you. Tell me when to start.
Please start.
I can hear that someone's still talking. So
You need to turn down, you'd need to turn down the audio on the device that you're watching the meeting. You are in the council meeting and it's your turn to address the council.
Okay. Good evening, council. My name is Karen Jacques, and I'm representing Trees for Sacramento. And first, I want to express my great appreciation that you are moving fast on this, and I hope we can continue moving great speed because climate is such a huge emergency. I'm very glad, we are all very glad to see that the Urban Forest Master Plan is back on track and looking forward to being able to have input in it when it comes out in January. I also want to call out and commend the plan to do a comprehensive neighborhood audit for purposes of active transportation. That audit is critical in terms of safety, it's critical in terms of equity, and I want to make sure that it's recognized that street trees that can address urban heat island effect and make it safe to walk and bike and roll in the summer are part of that audit, because we have some neighborhoods, particularly our forest neighborhoods, that are really lacking in trees. And so the coordination between what the Urban Forest Master Plan can do to help guide that audit and really looking at trees in that audit is critical. And I thank you for all of your efforts, and I thank you for this opportunity to comment. And I look forward to coming back at the December hearing.
Thank you, Karen.
Thank you for your comments. Next caller, please. Welcome to the meeting. You have 2 minutes to address the council.
Hello, my name is Kate Wilkins. I'm with 350 Sacramento. I wanted to give my strong support, not only individually, but on behalf of 350 Sacramento for these first year recommendations and actions, and commend staff on their work so far. And we appreciate the council's motion in August on the 10 key actions. I wanted to commend the city for appointing Jennifer Venema as the interim climate action lead. We strongly support the permanent creation of 2 full-time climate positions in the city manager's office, and do request that the public be able to provide some feedback to the city on the person selected permanently for that position. We also strongly support identifying communities without access to green space within a quarter mile, which was one of the first year recommendations. We believe you should start with historically marginalized communities to ensure all have access to parks and open space, like the Morrison Creek Revitalization Project. And we also support strongly the Environmental Justice Collaborative Governance Committee. We really appreciate the city's initial investment of $25,000 to get this started. We want to advocate for continued sustained support from the city. This committee should not just exist to exist, but it should really play a role in climate action implementation going forward, and hopefully have some shared decision-making authority. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your call. Next caller, please. Welcome to the meeting. You have 2 minutes to address the council.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Moise, and I'm calling from District 6. I helped the Mayor's Climate Commission with student outreach and the Equity Technical Advisory Committee. I was also active in calling on the city to declare a climate emergency last year. Thank you for passing that resolution. It's time for the city to act on it. So I'm calling in support of the implementation of today's climate recommendations, including slow streets and transit investments. I also want to see a really strong EJ Collaborative Governance Committee, even if independent from the city infrastructure. It should have authority to inform implementation and community engagement, not just to react to or review it. I also do support conservation and efficiency efforts using the framework of the full commission report. And I also just wanted to echo the opportunities created by the new building electrification ordinance. Electrification is one part of the comprehensive approach outlined in the full report. This ordinance is in concert with SMUD's efforts and other local trends towards electrification of new construction and the identified need with all its co-benefits of retrofitting existing buildings. It will support and create new jobs around pipe fitting through the need for electrical conduit relating to on-site solar and energy distribution, and more electric and energy efficient HVAC systems through retrofits. It will be further complemented by California's new solar mandate for new construction, and the state's 2035 electric vehicle mandate should increase the demand and adoption of electric charging infrastructure. Please support the acceleration of electrification in the city to minimize the number of stranded assets and costly retrofits that will have to occur if we don't start doing as much as possible as early as possible now, as this council resolved to do in the December 2019 climate emergency declaration. Please fully support, fund, and authorize staff and launch the public dashboard on the progress of their efforts. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next caller, please. Welcome to the meeting. You have 2 minutes to address the council.
Good afternoon, honorary council members and Mayor Steinberg. My name is Tom Ayton, and I am a 25-year member of Plumbers and Pipe Fitters Local 447. I am calling in today to voice my concerns I have on your pending electrification legislation. It is my understanding that all residential and commercial buildings 3 stories or less will be built without natural gas systems after the year 2023, and all of these types of projects will only have electric appliances. I totally understand the reasoning behind this change, as it will reduce our carbon footprint and decrease our damage to the environment with the most effort towards controlling climate change. As a member of the Plumbers and Pipe Fitters, I depend on the installation of piping systems to earn an honest living for my family. With the elimination of natural gas systems in this electrification bill, there will definitely be an impact on my livelihood. It has been shown that by cutting these systems out of these projects, it would reduce the amount of man hours required to complete the overall piping of a building by 15 to 25%. With these types of cuts, it most definitely means loss of jobs for individuals like me. In these uncertain times, instead of such a drastic change, I recommend that the council consider making subtle changes that will eventually capture their overall goals, but not impact my brothers and sisters in the piping industry all at once. It would be a great time to look at offsetting some of these lost installation hours with requiring these types of projects to include reclaimed water systems, pre-cool or preheat systems that would supplement other types of systems in these types of builds. It is with great respect that I ask you to consider offsetting some of this electrification legislation for a just cause. Thank you and have a great evening.
Thank you for your comment.
Thank you. I'm going to respond to that when I make my comments. Anybody else? That's it on the callers. Let's hear from members of the council. I know Councilmember Hanson is up.
Thanks, Mayor. I enjoyed the Climate Commission process, and it's always about the proof being in the pudding, so to speak. And I think today, Jennifer Venema, you've always impressed us, and I think you've given us an impressive plan to work from. So I'm very much in support of moving forward. Mayor, I'm glad you're going to address the plumbers and pipe fitters concern. I think just transition is still a key aspect of how we implement many of these things, whether it's changes to leaf blower rules or whether it's building electrification. There's always a group of people, and usually they're blue collar that are impacted the most. And I think it's only fair that we address that. I wanted to circle back for a second to this question about slow streets. Something I've been familiar with for a while, and our city through the CARES Act funding has launched alfresco dining across the city. We certainly have done as much as we can with the resources we have to create parking protected bike lanes. I know there's more in the hopper there, but I want us to make sure, and Mr. City Manager, as you work with the mayor and other staff on this, that our Vision Zero plan is really at the forefront of it. We have many communities throughout this city where it is unsafe to walk, it is unsafe to bike. There are no sidewalks, there are no bike lanes. And those communities that are disadvantaged tend to be the ones that are the least prepared with the right infrastructure for safe, active transportation. We have a lot of data on where those communities are that we just try to prioritize, if not fully emphasize those communities over other areas that already have bike lanes, sidewalks, etc. And I also think it would be wise, although not necessary. We have a very good active transportation commission. Each of us have appointed people to that with particular expertise. And Mayor, as you work on this with the city manager and the staff, I think that we could kick a variety of the pilot project locations to the Active Transportation Commission, like we've done with our other commissions, to provide those recommendations or maybe give them authority to move forward so that it can move expeditiously without necessarily having to come back to council. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. And thank you for your service, Councilmember Hanson. That was a lot of extra work and you really put your hidden heart into it. And I want to thank you.
Said 3 meetings and it was a few more than that. So thanks.
Okay. Anybody else before I run through a couple things? All right. We talked about slow streets. First of all, I just want to say that I am very pleased with the progress here. You know, sometimes I know I complain about the pace. I think that this is really a good start. And we are setting ourselves up organizationally to really lead on climate, and that it will be a major priority, I know, of mine in 2021. And I know it'll be a major priority of the city. A couple of items that I just want to put a little bit more oomph, if you will, or emphasis on are the following. On the green workforce, this is our signature opportunity, I think, to meld what we call inclusive economic development and climate in a way that stands out. And while the CARES Act provided us, I think, the beginnings of some significant investment, whether it was the California Mobility Center or some of the direct green job training, we need to do even more. I know Councilmember Guerra is working with the AQMD where there may be some resources, and Dr. Ayalo's on our climate commission and that group. I will tell you, and I'm not stealing Eric's thunder because he's the one who's been fighting for this, but you know that Hiram Johnson pre-apprenticeship program that you keep talking about and fighting for? Why not make that with the plumbers and pipe fitters, and I'll get to that in a moment, and the other trades, let's make that, let's fold this in and let's fund that thing at Hiram Johnson High School, because
all in.
That's an obvious one, and you've been working hard on it. And then, of course, we have the Biden administration, has been mentioned here today. We really are going to work hard over these next week in a collaboration with our federal lobbyists to make sure that Sacramento is ready when the new administration takes over and infrastructure becomes not just a talking point, but a funded reality. On this question of active transportation, this is another one that I just have a little bit of a concern about. I understand that if it is done in one way only, that the cost of auditing every neighborhood in our city could be enormous, but there's got to be another way to do this that doesn't cost $13 or $15 million to actually do the work that would put us in a position to develop a equitable citywide active transportation plan. And so let's throw out that big number because we're not going to put $15 million or whatever it is into an audit, but let's figure out a way that we can redefine what an audit means. We don't need an audit. We need a work plan that gets us started and has a sequential, aggressive strategy for meeting this vision here. And that is really, really important. I'm very happy that, again, the city manager, we talked and he put forward that $25,000 without Blinken and I, around the Environmental Justice Collaborative Governance Committee, which is going to be community-led and community-generated, and that's really, really important. To our partners, I would say friends, but our partners in the building trades, I want to contrast something. This is something I appreciate about Sacramento politics and the Sacramento community. There are other cities in this state where a mayor has put out a Green New Deal or an electrification plan where there was immediately a pitched public fight between a Democratic mayor and the building trades over what that meant to working people. And I so appreciate the testimony of 447 and their letter and the way they've approached this. Their concern is a real one, but instead of just saying no, no, no to progress on climate, they're saying, what can we do together? And I think they've made a very good suggestion, which is that there could be real work for working people in the whole water conservation area. And we ought to, and by the way, water conservation is inextricably tied to climate change because of the impact on our water supplies with the snow cap. And so I would like on the 8th of December, again, to add water conservation as a immediate element of our work plan, dealing with climate for all the right reasons. Not only is it important for climate, but it also helps build that broad coalition where we say we can put people to work, and at the same time, we can aggressively pursue our carbon zero goals faster than not. And so I ask that come back as well for the 8th of December. Really a good start. Thank you to everybody involved. Again, City Manager Howard Chan, thank you. Jennifer Venom and my team, Julia Burrows, the Climate Commission, led by Ann Stausball. They're keeping us honest and holding us accountable as they should. And this is just the beginning. A lot more on this in 2021. Thank you. All right. That is the agenda for this afternoon. Is there public testimony on items not on the agenda?
I do have 5 callers signed up to speak, and I do have board and commission appointments to read into the record. May I do that?
Okay.
Board and commission appointments are Aggie Square Enhanced Infrastructure Financing District Public Financing Authority, and appointed are Joni Titherington and Nicolina Hernandez. To the Capital Area Development Authority, Emily Bamey. To the Natomas Basin Conservancy Board of Directors, Melinda Bradbury and John Shirey. To the Sacramento Disabilities Advisory Commission, Will Kennedy, Parshan Kroshev, Angelica Williams. To the Sacramento Yellow Mosquito and Vector Control District, Raymond Latour. And then Megan Fidel and Melissa Lee. And I need to confirm district. And Megan Fidel and Melissa Lee are to the Utilities Rate Advisory Commission. Are you ready for public comment for matters not on the agenda?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Thank you. May we have our first caller, please? Welcome to the meeting. You have 2 minutes to address the council.
Thank you.
Please proceed.
Hello. Can they hear me?
Yes, we can. You have 2 minutes to address the council.
Hi, my name is Raquel. I'm calling in regards to the item number 20 regarding the audit. I want to thank the whole team there tonight and City Council for taking the time to really address this issue. And I really want to give a big thanks to Daryl for really making sure that social equity is part of this discussion. And the fact that you want to hear from us really it makes me feel good about the way the city is thinking about approaching this. The fact that these operators who are already in operation status and who have obviously violated not the law, but have done some things that were not in compliance, they have an opportunity that we didn't have as core members, And what I mean by that, they had an opportunity to get into an industry that's very difficult and have less restrictions. And with that being said, none of those operators and entities have contributed to social equity at all. Not from what I know. For example, none of those dispensaries have opened up shelf space for any of social equity participants to even maybe launch a brand or have their brand in any of those local dispensaries. With that being said, I just want you guys to keep in mind that diversity was not part of that audit. And what the audit did not show is that there are 0 Black-owned dispensaries here in the Sacramento area, and that is an issue. I know that the City Council wants diversity in our city, and I feel like the current operators that we currently have, it doesn't represent what our city is, and it doesn't represent our culture in a sense where we don't have diversity. And so I want to thank Carr and Mrs. Ashby for, the support on wanting to make sure that social equity participants aren't lost in this these plans when it comes to, launching the regulations for.
Thank you for your comments. Your time is complete. Will you make your final comment, please?
Yes. Also, the fact that you guys want to do workshops, the workshop is a great idea, and I hope that you guys allow us to participate in that workshop and allow us to voice our opinions because we are.
Thank you for your comments.
And
Thank you for your comments.
Bye.
Next caller, please. Welcome to the meeting. You have 2 minutes to address the council.
Yes, my name's Charles Ware, and I'm with the Oak Park Homeless Project. I'm a lifetime resident of Oak Park, which means I'm part of Jason Neer's District 5. I want to know the status of the XW shelter. Are we going to have any warming centers in the Oak Park area this winter? When is the city going to step up and purchase one or more of the Fleabag hotels on Stockton Boulevard? And is there still home key money available?
I think somebody should get back to the caller. I'm not sure there's home key money left. In fact, there is not. We applied for specific projects that are now in the process of being negotiated and hopefully delivered. But we should
May I?
take the number. Yes, Howard.
We'll have a staff member get back to this gentleman and walk him through and give him the update.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay.
Well, Allison at Jason Neer's office is familiar with me. So.
I'm sorry. Sir, do we have his number?
We know Mr. Weir, and if Howard can have somebody update Mr. Weir on some of those questions, and I actually have a comment on the WX when we get to council comments.
Okay.
We'll do.
Great. Thank you for your comments. Next caller, please. Welcome to the meeting. You have 2 minutes to address the council.
Hi, my name is Paul. I'm a 45-year native of Sacramento. I was recently contacted by code enforcement. The reason was because I had a refrigerator and pantry storage installed in a cove space on the property I live at, facing the alley next to my house. I was contacted a few days or so after its installation because a neighbor called to complain. Mind you, it had literally been installed around a few days before and had no chance to become an issue before a call went in. I was first told that Penal Code 402B applies. This code section states the following: any person who discards or abandons, which doesn't apply, or leaves in any place accessible to children, any refrigerator, which does apply, with a capacity of more than 1.5 cubic feet, also applies, which is no longer in use, doesn't apply because it's being used by homeless people and people affected by COVID who have, blips in income and need some help, and which has not had the door removed, which does not apply. It states that these all have to be requirements met to find it a crime. All conditions aren't met. I was then approached with a different reference number to a Sac City code, which also referenced any item which is blighted or is left in such a way that it is basically discarded. None of these are applied. None of these applied.
It is out of the way, it is on my property. It is checked 2 to 3 times a day, cleaned, and has a 24-hour security camera trained on it, which sends notifications to me. Given the current need in the city and county, this seems like an effort made to appease one neighbor rather than understanding the amount of people who utilize this service, both as a way to donate food and as a way to eat. Now this has been here for over a month. Many people have been helped. I've seen individuals, folks on bikes, a few families, some appear to be homeless with multiple children, others who have been hurt by COVID and just need food to fill in the gaps when they're short on money. I've had 0 people camping out or otherwise creating a nuisance. Although in my over 5 years of living here, there hasn't really been that big of an issue in the alley. I've had 0 instances where anyone even stuck around for longer than 2 to 3 minutes. I'd like to ask that a city employee look into this. I'm not looking to run afoul of the law, but it appears that from the ordinance cited
Thank you
to
for your
me,
comments.
matters
Your
that have
time is
to deal with the
complete. Will you
situation.
make your final comment, please?
Yeah, my final comment is Peter Lemos did contact me and advise me of possible solutions through other organizations, but the reality is there needs to be clarity with regards to what is required going forward to ensure that these aren't handled ad hoc, but orgs can address issues prior to installation. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Mayor, I'd like to just respond to that comment quickly.
Yes.
So my office, and I think some of the other offices received an email from Paul at 12:30 right before we entered into our meetings today. The code staff did follow up, but my team, whether Matt or Isabella, will follow up with Paul and help try to resolve this in a positive way. It does look like a quite innovative solution to providing access to food, but we want to do it in combination with the city staff. So I just wanted to make that quick.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Next.
Caller, please. Welcome to the meeting. You have 2 minutes to address the council. Welcome to the meeting. You have 2 minutes to address the council.
Hello, yes, this is Lambert of To the Bay and Back Cheesecakes. I want to thank Mayor Steinberg for mentioning Biden because it was the black vote in the Deep South in South Carolina that saved his candidacy. And hopefully he doesn't forget that when he gets into office. Now I want to focus in on Sacramento, my hometown. Literally, I love Sacramento, but my love goes deeper in Del Paso Heights. And I have people that are ready to be hired now. I even had someone who said she heard me on city council. She speaks 3 different languages and she's in Del Paso Heights. That's another example that Cheesecakes appeals to different cultures. She speaks 3 different languages and they all like the cheesecakes we released last weekend. I want to thank also City Councilman Guerra. He was very kind to my family, sending us a letter, thanking us. He even said his 2-year-old is still asking about the cheesecake. I mean, I don't know how much more we got to prove that we're ready to be funded. Now, I'm going to say this, and I'm going to mean what I say because I always say what I mean. If we're not funded going into the holidays, then there's no excuse after that because it'll be 2021. This is when we need the funding. And we submitted our proposal back in January before COVID, and I voted for Measure U twice, and it's been affected. Now the CARES Act, and there's a balance there. Cut the check loose. There's a 2/3 vote that the city council can do with the mayor based on what I've studied, and that would force the city manager's office to cut us a check. Otherwise, equity and all of these different terminologies that are being used, that should be applied to us.
Thank you for your comments. Your time is complete. Will you make your final comment, please?
Yeah, I'm asking Mayor Steinberg to organize that 2/3 vote because we need the check now. We have people ready to go.
Thank you for your comments.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna. Okay,
No more callers.
that's it. Council ideas and questions, please.
Mayor, I have 2 comments. One is on the WX Broadway shelter, and hopefully with a change in administration in Washington, we'll be able to move forward on that. I know one of the pieces is moving funds which are in possession by the city into the right place so that we can get SHRA to move forward. So I would ask the city manager to take a look at that and with Mr. Conlon and see if we can get that going now. The other thing is I want to request that the Crocker Art Museum, which unfortunately is now closing again because of us moving into purple. So where they were only allowing a very small number of people, the museum will have to shut its doors for a while. But I'd like to see if we can get them to come to the city council to just do a presentation on where they are in Crocker Next, which is the initiative that they have going to redo the park and hopefully parking. We've been working with them for quite a while. COVID has certainly crimped the style of what we're trying to do here. But I think for the council, it'd be important just to see what's going on. They've raised in pledges over $40 million. So an update for the council would be a good thing. And hopefully we can do that within the next few weeks. It'd be short. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, members, we do have a closed session. So let us adjourn, and it's 5:10. Why don't we just take 5 minutes and we'll gather in a closed session at 5:15. Thank you all very much. If there's nothing further, we are adjourned.